Chapter 66 Ron and Harry's Surprising Discovery, Part 1. Seeing the solemn faces of the three nodding heads, Eisen knew that they had listened to his words. This is something that Eisen is very relieved about. As for how to fight the death curse, Eisen thinks that they can temporarily train their ability to dodge the curse. In the future, they can also train their ability of transfiguration, so that they can use transfiguration to transform into entities to resist the death curse. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa do install the latest version. No way, it seems that apart from avoiding the death curse, only physical bunkers can resist it. Okay, today's actual combat training is here. Wei hesitated and Eisen waved to the trio. By the way, there is one more thing I want to tell you. Afterwards, Eisen told the trio that in the next period of time, Principal Dumbledore might announce that Voldemort had been completely killed and could never return. But, Professor Eisen, we all know that Voldemort is not completely dead, right? That's what Professor Dumbledore told me. Why did he do that? After listening to Eisen's words, Harry looked at Eisen in surprise. Yes, Professor Eisen, Dumbledore is the greatest wizard of our time. If he said that Voldemort would not come back, everyone would believe him. Wouldn't it be too dangerous if Voldemort did come back? Hermione was puzzled, asked out. You all know about Voldemort possessing Professor Quirrell last year? Eisen changed the subject and looked at Harry. Yes, at the time we thought it was Snape who was going to steal the Philosopher's Stone for Voldemort, but we didn't expect it to be Voldemort possessed by Professor Quirrell. Saying this, Harry showed a slightly embarrassed expression. Professor Quirrell went to the primeval forest of Albania to accumulate some practical experience in defense against the dark arts. There, Professor Quirrell met Voldemort's remnant soul. Eisen said with a pause, Voldemort possessed Quirrell after the professor's operation to steal the Philosopher's Stone failed. The remnant soul most likely returned to the primeval forest of Albania. So it's like this. Harry looked surprised, but then looked at Eisen suspiciously. But what does this have to do with the propaganda that Voldemort has been completely killed? Hermione and Ron nodded in agreement. Do you know? Eisen changed the subject. His face became serious. Actually, since Voldemort's downfall, many of his Death Eaters have been imprisoned in Azkaban. But there are also many Death Eaters. He escaped punishment from the Ministry of Magic on the grounds that he was under the Imperius curse. I know, Delaco's father is like that. Ron swallowed and spoke out first. Some Death Eaters are no longer loyal to Voldemort, but some Death Eaters are still Voldemort's loyal subordinates. If these people know that Voldemort's remnant soul is still wandering in the primeval forests of Albania, they will definitely try to revive Voldemort. Eisen gave the three meaningful glances. So Professor Dumbledore thinks that spreading the news that Voldemort has been completely killed is to make those Death Eaters who are still loyal to Voldemort give up their search for Voldemort's remnant soul. Hermione couldn't help but exclaimed. Voldemort was not completely killed, but it is very difficult to be resurrected. If it is not for the help of Death Eaters, Voldemort cannot be resurrected alone. Eisen nodded. If you use this kind of propaganda to promote Voldemort, the way of being completely dead makes the Death Eaters give up looking for Voldemort, then Voldemort will not be able to be resurrected. What does the professor mean? Let's not spread the news that Voldemort is not dead? Harry finally realized it. That's right. As long as you know that Voldemort didn't die completely, but don't go around talking about it. Eisen nodded. Obviously, that's what he meant. After leaving the room of requirement, the trio returned to the Gryffindor common room. The next day, the atmosphere in Hogwarts became lively. A considerable number of young wizards began to believe that Professor Lockhart was not a conspirator, but was slandered by Rita Skeeter. Perhaps because Rita and Lockhart are well-known people, or because their peers are enemies, their book fans also began to scold each other in the newspapers. This caused the young wizards in Hogwarts to polarize their attitudes towards Lockhart. Some little wizards or Lockhart fans believe that Lockhart solved the basilisk alone, is a hero of Hogwarts, and is definitely not a conspirator who aims to seize the post of principal. Another group of wizards believe that Professor Lockhart had no ability to deal with the basilisk at all. Several professors must have dealt with the basilisk together, but Lockhart turned this into his own experience. But in this regard, the trio did not have the time to express their views. Early in the morning, Hermione hurriedly began to review her homework after having breakfast. There are only 3 weeks until the final exam of the second grade, which is already a very dangerous time for a top student. As for Harry and Ron, they received a note from Professor McGonagall during the meal, which stated that the two of them would go to Professor Lockhart's office at 8 o'clock in the evening to be confined. For a while, Harry and Ron were not interested in talking about Lockhart's spat with Rita. After a day of potions class, herbal medicine class and defense against the dark arts class, Harry and Ron came to Lockhart's office after asking Hermione to inform Professor Eisen to suspend the dueling team's actual combat training for a day. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Harry and Ron knocked on the door of Lockhart's office just in time. What's the matter? Lockhart looked sickly. It seemed that although his physical injuries had healed, he had suffered a great blow mentally. We're here for confinement. The two faltered, but it was Harry who said the purpose. Oh, yes, you two little bastards. Lockhart's mood was even worse when he thought of the two men pointing their wands at him and forcing him to the entrance of the second-floor bathroom back room. Come on, let me think about how to punish you, so that you will sincerely repent. Thank you Gilderoy Lockhart for his greatness and generosity. Lockhart dragged the two into the office, chattering boastfully. Harry and Ron stared at Lockhart dumbfounded, with a sense of horror. I figured it out. Lockhart didn't care about Harry and Ron's attitude at all. He took out a thick stack of envelopes from a cabinet on the side of the desk and placed them in front of them. This is... Harry and Ron looked at the thick stack of letters in front of them in confusion, and after looking at each other, they had a sense of foreboding. Haha, these are some letters of support from fanatical fans. Now, you need to transcribe them all. Lockhart swept away his previously sluggish look and became energetic. Harry opened an envelope, and the letter inside read, Dear Gilderoy, I am your loyal reader Lisa. I sleep with your book every day. I am absolutely sure that you are not a conspiracy. You are a great adventure family. Ron stared at the envelope in his hand in a daze. The content on the letter paper was as follows. Dear Gilderoy, I am your loyal reader Abelard. Don't be influenced by that shameless woman Rita just in a good mood. I will stand behind you all my life. You are so charming. Vomit. After Harry and Ron looked at each other, they almost threw up their dinner. Hurry up and start copying. This is your punishment for attacking the professor. Lockhart sat behind the desk and yawned, then looked at the two and continued. Although you have seen how I solved the basilisk alone, yes, but I still want you and my readers to feel my greatness. The two of them had no right to choose to refuse. In desperation, they could only hold back and start copying without using their brains. Rita Skeeter, that damned woman, knows how to slander the great Gilderoy. I must let you know how big my readership is. Lockhart spread out a piece of parchment, dabbed it with a quill. The ink was writing something on it, and he was muttering while writing. It seemed that he was very angry with Rita's article. Harry and Ron looked at each other without speaking, just copying quietly. Ho ho. The sound of snoring did not know when it sounded. Harry and Ron glanced at the clock on the wall, only to realize that it was already midnight. Seeing Lockhart lying on the chair and snoring, the two looked at each other. Chapter 67 Harry and Ron's Amazing Discovery, Part 2. Have you finished copying? Glancing at Lockhart, who was sleeping crookedly, Ron asked Harry in a low voice. No, I only copied less than half of it. After listening to Ron's words, Harry flipped through the thick stack of letter papers in front of him, and then smiled wryly. Let's stop here today. You see, Professor Lockhart is tired. Ron made a very constructive suggestion. Harry thought for a while and nodded. Then he and Ron mustered up the courage to wake Lockhart up and asked to leave. Lockhart yawned, glanced at the time, and waved to the two. It's so late? Go ahead, put the envelope in the cabinet, and come over tomorrow to receive the punishment. Harry and Ron froze. After looking at each other, they reluctantly picked up the envelope and stuffed it into the cabinet next to the desk. It was clear to both of them that Lockhart had pulled these envelopes out of this cabinet. Opening the cabinet revealed several drawers. Harry and Ron glanced at each other, opened them one by one, and stuffed the envelopes in their hands into a drawer with a relatively large space. Just as Ron was about to close the drawers, several rolls of parchment in one drawer caught Harry's attention. Several rolls of parchment were rolled and folded together, revealing a line of writing that interrupted Ron. Look, Harry pointed to the writing on the parchment. Break with the ghost, that ugly witch. Ron looked in the direction Harry was pointing at and saw a line written on the folded parchment. Break with the ghost is Lockhart's textbook. Ron whispered. Harry stretched out his hand and turned it over on the parchment, and a line of writing was revealed in front of the two of them. The witch who expelled the female ghost of Wanluin. I can't believe she is a mouth. That is really too ugly. But fortunately she forgot all this. Seeing this line of words, Harry and Ron's heartbeats suddenly accelerated. They had a hunch that they had found something big. What are you inking? Came Lockhart's voice. Oh, right away, Harry replied, gave Ron a look, and then pulled out all the rolls of parchment and put them in the storage ring. Professor, let's go first. After paying close attention to the cabinet, Harry and Ron left in a hurry, regardless of Lockhart's reaction. Along the way, neither of them spoke. It seemed that it was the first time to secretly steal something from the professor's office. After Harry came out, his face was a little pale and his heart was pounding, but he managed to calm down and returned to the Gryffindor common room with Ron. By midnight, the Gryffindor common room was already empty. The two came to the fireplace and sat down, took out the parchment they had just obtained, and looked at it carefully under the light of the fireplace. Opening the folded parchment, one of the pages was revealed, and the content on it also surprised the two of them. It read, Wandering Records with Werewolves, Old Ugly Armenian Wizard. Continue to scroll down, and the content in it makes Harry and Ron feel very familiar. First, he expressed his admiration for the wonderful experience of the old Armenian wizard who saved a village from the scourge of werewolves, and then satirized him as old and ugly, even if it will never attract attention if it is in the newspaper. The contents of the Wandering with Werewolves textbook. Ron glanced at Harry. Immediately afterwards, the two continued to look through the stack of parchment and found that there were records of some content such as walking with ghouls and walking with trolls. But the more they watched, the more horrified and inexplicable they felt. After reading it over and over several times, the two found that the contents recorded on these parchments were almost the same as those in the textbooks. The only difference is that the protagonist of the event experience is not Lockhart. The records on the parchment were obviously recorded from the perspective of a third party. Those aren't Lockhart's adventures. Harry looked at Ron with a sudden look of surprise on his face. You mean, those books by Lockhart, those experiences are all fake? Hearing Harry's assertion, Ron was also very surprised. No, those adventures belong to other people. It was Lockhart who stole them for himself, turned them into his own, and then wrote them into a book. Harry's voice became slightly louder, and then Harry seemed to remember what, with a look of sudden realization. No wonder Lockhart's class content is to recite a large part of the book. He is a liar who knows nothing. But, didn't he kill the basilisk? You saw it too. Ron showed hesitation, as if he wanted to refute Harry's statement. You really believe that Lockhart took care of the basilisk? I think you must have seen that Lockhart passed out. Harry couldn't help curling his lips after he finished speaking. Hearing Harry's words, Ron froze, but then gave another reason. But if that's what other people have experienced, why didn't Lockhart write it as a book and sell so many books? Who's going to find him? I mean, no one's telling the truth in the papers. Look here. Harry froze for a moment, then seemed to remember something, picked up the parchment next to him, opened one of the pages and pointed to Ron. It's a good thing she forgot about it. Ron read the line. See, Lockhart must have used some means to make those people forget about those experiences. There was a hint of excitement in Harry's tone. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years. Yet we're reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwoyudu here. Forgetting the curse. Ron couldn't help swallowing and said in answer. The Oblivion Curse? Harry asked back. That's right. The Oblivion Charm can make them forget what they've experienced. Ron picked up the parchment and turned it over several times, then whispered after glancing around. For a moment, the two looked at each other. No one expected that it was just a confinement, but they discovered an amazing fact. Lockhart is really a liar. Then what should we do? Tell the professor this? After a while, Ron couldn't help but say out loud. Do you think Dumbledore knows Lockhart's true face? The shock on Harry's face had subsided, and when he saw Ron's suspicious look, he continued, Remember, Hagrid once said that Lockhart was Dumbledore's choice of defense against the dark arts class, the only candidate for a professor. You mean, Dumbledore knew Lockhart's true face from the beginning? Ron was taken aback, his tone getting louder. I don't know, but you're right. Maybe we can tell Professor Eisen about it. Harry shrugged, then put the parchment away. Afterwards, the two returned to the dormitory and fell asleep. At noon the next day, after Harry and Ron finished Transfiguration class, they found Eisen, who had just come out of the library. Seeing that the two were looking for something to do with him, Eisen followed Harry and Ron to an empty classroom. What's the matter? Is there anything you can do with me? Seeing the mysterious look of the two, Eisen showed curiosity. At this time, the problem of the secret room has been solved, so they should be fine. Professor, look at this. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, then took out a few pages of folded parchment and placed them in front of Eisen. This is... Eisen looked at Harry suspiciously. Professor, we were in detention at Professor Lockhart's last night. Harry said with some embarrassment. I know, Professor McGonagall said this. So I decided to wait for your confinement time to pass before starting the dueling team's actual combat training. Eisen nodded, motioning for Harry to continue. We found these in a locker in Lockhart's office. Harry pointed to the parchment in front of him. Ron next to him showed an expectant look. You guys are really brave. You dare to steal something from the professor's office. Eisen looked at the two meaningfully, and the two lowered their heads in shame. Copy in pairs. Eisen took out his wand and pointed, and the folded parchment became 2 copies. Eisen waved his wand again, and the parchment Harry took out quickly changed into a mosquito and flew out. As soon as the god's perspective was opened, the mosquito transformed from the parchment quickly shuttled through the corridor, and then came to Lockhart's office, got into the drawer of the cabinet, and changed back to its original form again. Professor, who are you? Harry looked at Eisen's actions in surprise, and Ron also showed envy. Send that parchment back to Lockhart's office, so as not to cause unexpected trouble. Eisen took a deep look at the two of them, then picked up the parchment and opened it to read. Chapter 68. The Unlucky Lockhart. For a while, the whole classroom fell silent. Only the sound of Eisen flipping the parchment remained. After a while, Eisen refolded the parchment and put it down, then looked at Harry and Ron. So, what do you mean? Eisen's mouth twitched slightly, and he looked at Harry and Ron. It's obvious that Professor Lockhart stole other people's experience, and he took everything that others did on himself. Harry said in an aggrieved tone. It can be seen that if the above is not wrong, Lockhart did it. Eisen nodded, and then continued, You mean, let me tell Professor Dumbledore the truth about this matter, and then let Dumbledore the professor fired Lockhart? Harry hesitated for a moment. Since Lockhart is a liar, of course Dumbledore should fire him, Ron said with gritted teeth. Seeing Ron's upset look, Eisen was a little strange. Hadn't Ron had an altered sense of Lockhart? Why did you become like this again? Apparently, Eisen didn't know that Harry had already uttered a warning to break Ron's illusion about Lockhart's strength. But what if Lockhart is expelled from the school? Eisen sat down on the stool next to him and looked at the two of them playfully. There is no defense against the dark arts professor to apply for at this time. Professor Eisen, Lockhart didn't teach us anything at all. How could he continue to be a professor of defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts school if he is a liar? Harry couldn't help but get excited when he spoke. Yes, but the final exam is less than 3 weeks away, and Lockhart has been teaching you for almost a year. This means that when the final exam, you can use everything you learned in defense against the dark arts class. Got it? Eisen paused. After seeing the confusion on the faces of the two, Eisen continued. If Lockhart is expelled at this time, or another professor temporarily replaces the defense against the dark arts class, then the content of the exam may no longer be the content of Lockhart's book. This means that you have studied defense against the dark arts for a year, but you have not learned the real skills. In the end, you may not even pass the final exam. Isn't that too bad? After hearing Eisen's words, Harry and Ron opened their mouths but didn't know what to say. Indeed, this year, Lockhart's teaching content is basically fragments of his works. Then during the exam, the content is naturally those fragments. But if Lockhart was fired, or if the defense against the dark arts professor was replaced, what they had learned might really be for naught. Seeing the appearance of the two, Eisen smiled slightly. To be honest, judging from the current situation, what Eisen can be sure of is that even if the professor of defense against the dark arts is changed, most of the content of the final exam will be found in Lockhart's book. Otherwise, second-year wizards would fail their defense against the dark arts exams. Then what? Ron looked at Eisen confused. Otherwise, Professor Eisen, go talk to Dumbledore. This matter should be handled by the headmaster. Harry proposed a solution. Perhaps Dumbledore already knew Lockhart's true face. Eisen pondered for a moment, then said slowly. When they saw that the two were about to speak again, they waved their hands and continued, But you are right. I really need to talk to Dumbledore about this. Hearing what Eisen said, Harry and Ron immediately calmed down. Go to eat. You still have class in the afternoon. Eisen waved to the two and drove them out of the classroom. Sitting on the stool, Eisen looked out of the window. After changing his gaze, Eisen could see that the surrounding grounds of the entire castle were covered in green, and the pale blue lake was glowing with purple light, indicating that summer had arrived. After a while, Eisen took the folded rolls of parchment and walked out of the classroom to Dumbledore's office. Professor Eisen, what's the matter? Dumbledore picked up a lemon sherbet and stuffed it into his mouth, then looked at Eisen, who had just knocked on the door and entered. Yes, Harry and Ron were in detention, and found this in Professor Lockhart's office. Eisen noticed that Dumbledore seemed to be in a good mood, and passed the parchment directly. In a few moments, Dumbledore had flipped through the parchment. I didn't expect Gilderoy to do such a thing. I think Hogwarts can no longer let him be the professor of defense against the dark arts. After putting down the parchment, Dumbledore looked at Eisen and said solemnly, I really believed your nonsense. Eisen couldn't help complaining in his heart. If Dumbledore didn't know what Lockhart was, Eisen would absolutely not believe it. That's right, but Professor Lockhart just defeated the basilisk one-on-one. And many students think he is a man of real ability. Eisen didn't finish the sentence, but he felt that Dumbledore must understand what he meant. Maybe he has some skills, but it's nothing to do with stealing other people's adventures, Dumbledore said, picking up another lemon sherbet and popping it into his mouth. You're right. Will you fire him then? Eisen nodded slightly and continued to ask, Isn't Rita reporting on Gilderoy's solution to the basilisk? I think it's okay to send it to Rita. Dumbledore picked up the rolls of parchment and gestured to Eisen. Hiss. Watching Dumbledore's actions, Eisen couldn't help but gasp. Right now, Rita and Lockhart are arguing with each other in the newspaper. If Rita gets the black material, then Lockhart probably won't try to clean himself up. At that time, after Lockhart became the target of everyone shouting and beating, he might no longer have the face to continue to be the professor of defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts. After all, many students have already seen through Lockhart's true colors. If these black materials are exposed, his loyal readers will probably turn black as well. Looking at the smiling Dumbledore, Eisen couldn't help but murmured, It's so scary. That night, Harry and Ron continued their detention in Lockhart's office, transcribing letters from Lockhart's readers. But early the next morning, The whole school was almost boiling. Because a new issue of the Daily Prophet broke a big story. Rita had a front-page article, Lockhart, best-selling author or liar. That was very poignant. At the beginning of the article, Rita introduced that she learned the truth that the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets was found from Hogwarts Principal Dumbledore himself. Dumbledore said, Harry Potter has done another great thing since he defeated the Dark Lord and made him completely dead, and that is to find the entrance to the secret chamber of Hogwarts. My apologies to Lockhart here. He is not a conspirator, but a liar who likes to credit other people's adventures to himself. Like all his works, it is hard to believe that the adventures of a best-selling author are all fake. The article not only wrote the title of Lockhart's best-selling book in detail, but also took photos of some evidence and directly pasted it next to it. With the endorsement of Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of our time, and the evidence posted in the article, this issue of the Daily Prophet has caused a tsunami-level impact. The entire Hogwarts students, not only when they were eating, but even when they were walking, were talking about this matter. Some students who firmly believed that Lockhart was a liar all showed the appearance of, I already said that Lockhart is a liar. And those female students who have always admired Lockhart cursed in disappointment. I can't believe that Professor Lockhart is such a person. Yeah, my mother still admires him very much. Who would have thought that he is a liar? Now let's see how he can stay at Hogwarts. The little wizards expressed their opinions one after another, and it seemed that Lockhart had been sentenced. Professor Eisen, the report in the newspaper is, during lunch in the auditorium, the three of them gathered around Eisen, and Harry's face was full of surprise and confusion. Principal Dumbledore's decision. Eisen said calmly, with a very calm tone. After finishing speaking, Eisen glanced at Hermione, but saw that there was only a little surprise on her face, and she was not disappointed that Lockhart's character design collapsed. Loud noises suddenly came from the entrance of the auditorium leading to the foyer, and Eisen noticed many little wizards moving towards the hall. What happened? Ron looked at this scene in surprise, and Harry and Hermione also stood up and looked over. When Eisen opened his god's perspective, he actually saw Lockhart's figure in the foyer. Eisen and the trio then followed the crowd and walked there. I, Gilderoy Lockhart, am definitely not a liar to deceive people. That woman Rita likes to make things up. Lockhart waved his wand in his hand, speaking in a panic, but was interrupted suddenly in the middle of the sentence. But Professor Dumbledore testified that it was Harry who found the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets, didn't he? A voice rang out from the crowd. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa you do install the latest version. That's not important, did you see it? I killed the giant basilisk in the secret room. Lockhart pointed his wand at the corpse of the basilisk on the other side of the hall. His face turned red. He didn't know he was angry, or because of anger. After Lockhart finished speaking, as if to prove his strength, he swung his wand forcefully at the basilisk's corpse. Boom! No one expected that an accident would happen at this time. A flash of red light from Lockhart's wand hit the basilisk in the head, causing an explosion and a commotion. The little wizards stepped back one after another, with horrified expressions on their faces. Fortunately, they were some distance away from the corpse of the basilisk, so they were not hurt except for a little fright. What? After the explosion, the screams attracted everyone's attention. Eisen and the little wizards looked and found that Lockhart was lying on the ground curled up. His face was covered with a mixture of blood and toxins from the explosion of the basilisk's head, corroding large wounds. Chapter 69 Curse? Professor Eisen, is Lockhart injured? Hermione, who was standing next to Eisen, grabbed his arm, showing concern in her tone. It seemed that Hermione was still kind-hearted. This is really bad luck. Ron's voice sounded. Afterwards, the noise at the scene became even louder. Ah, my face! Lockhart screamed on the ground, causing the terrified little wizards around to look at each other. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall soon arrived on the scene. Quiet! Dumbledore's voice overwhelmed the whispers of the young wizards, and then came to Lockhart, put his wand on his face, and the white light emerged, making Lockhart's screams stop. Further treatment is needed, Gilderoy. I think you need to go to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical injuries and injuries. After careful observation, Dumbledore told Lockhart of his judgment. Oh, this is such an unfortunate incident. Professor McGonagall looked solemn, and then looked at the little wizards around him. All little wizards, get out of here. After dinner, go prepare for the afternoon class. The little wizards suddenly exclaimed like birds and beasts scattered. This is so exciting. I didn't expect this kind of thing to happen. It's like a dream, but Lockhart's unlucky. The voices sounded, making Eisen feel a little speechless. This Lockhart has just been exposed and has become a liar who calls people to beat him. Unexpectedly, he was directly injured when he was trying to clean himself up. The little wizards returned to the auditorium to continue eating, but everyone turned their heads to look in the direction of the foyer from time to time. Obviously, what happened today is particularly eye-catching. Professor Eisen, now Lockhart can't be our defense against the dark arts professor. Harry asked impatiently as soon as he sat down. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books. Yegwa reading, Yegwa you do install the latest version. Don't worry, I think Dumbledore will definitely arrange it, Eisen said calmly after seeing several young wizards looking at him. On this day, Hogwarts school was completely lively. Whether students are at recess or in class, they can't help but talk about the hapless Lockhart. By the afternoon, everyone knew that Lockhart, a crook, was injured and sent to St. Mungo's. When some young wizards passed through the hall, they found that the body of the basilisk had disappeared. Obviously, in order to prevent further accidents, the corpse of the basilisk was also disposed of by the school. The library was originally a very quiet place, but Eisen heard many senior students whispering while reading today. The subject of the discussion was none other than the hapless Lockhart. Apparently, such an explosive event has also attracted the attention of senior students. Still, Eisen is a bit skeptical about Lockhart's bad luck. In fact, Eisen knew about the curse in defense against the dark arts. It is said that this is the curse cast by Voldemort after he was rejected as a professor of defense against the dark arts, which made the professor of this course unable to teach for more than 1 year, and various accidents would occur. Like what happened to Lockhart today. It happened right in front of Eisen's eyes, so he was pretty much sure it was an accident. However, Lockhart was taught in defense against the dark arts, and Eisen understood that things might not be that simple. Perhaps, the accident that Lockhart encountered was actually the result of the curse. However, even if Eisen knew what was going on, it still felt a little outrageous. After all, cursing is still very intuitive to say. Whether it is to curse an item or someone, it is a very obvious method. But casting a curse on a course is, in Eisen's view, a bit of a stretch, because this seems to be closer to a conceptual approach. However, if it was only for this reason, Eisen still didn't understand. Don't understand why Dumbledore didn't do something about it. Eisen felt that even if changing the name of the Defense Against the Dark Arts class was useless, it should be possible to apply a strong protective spell to this class. You must know that Dumbledore is absolutely capable of defeating Voldemort in terms of strength. Since Voldemort could cast a curse on defense against the dark arts, it didn't make sense that Dumbledore wouldn't be able to cast a protective spell on the class. Or is it because Voldemort's attainments in the dark arts far surpassed Dumbledore's, making Dumbledore somewhat helpless? No matter what, Eisen couldn't believe that this was the truth. Of course, regardless of whether the truth of the matter is what Eisen speculated, at least Hogwarts School has consumed too much defense against the dark arts professors. During the first year, Professor Quirrell had an accident. The same is true for Professor Lockhart in his second year. As for the future time, if Voldemort's problem is not solved, I'm afraid we will have to change professors every year. Thinking of this, Eisen felt that the students of Hogwarts these years were a bit pitiful. After all, defense against the dark arts is an extremely important class for any young wizard. If the professor of defense against the dark arts was taught by a master like Snape for 7 consecutive years, then after the little wizards graduated, it was basically expected that their actual combat ability would definitely be multiplied several times. But it is a pity that the defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts changes every year. Not to mention the teaching level, even the frequent change of professors in a course will have a great impact on the little wizard. Just like Lockhart's defense against the dark arts professor, what's the use of teaching students how to endorse? Perhaps for a schoolmaster like Hermione, he could find out some methods and techniques to deal with vampires or werewolves from those books. But Eisen felt that most young wizards probably read those books as stories. The professors of the defense against the dark arts class who changed frequently had uneven levels, which to some extent slowed down the progress of the young wizard's growth. Of course, maybe Voldemort did it on purpose. After all, the reduction of Hogwarts students' defense against the dark arts means that it is less difficult for the dark arts to rise. That would make it easier for Voldemort to face them when he came back from the resurrection. In fact, according to the development of the original plot, Eisen felt that Voldemort's purpose had indeed been achieved. Judging from the battle between Voldemort's resurrection and Dumbledore's forces, one will find an obvious situation. That is the main force of the Second Wizarding War. In fact, those who participated in the First Wizarding War. Students like Harry, Hermione, Neville, etc., if they didn't participate in more battles in the next few years, which made them grow up rapidly, they would have no way to decide the direction of the war. But even so, each of their victories has been so close that it looks like they might have lost if it weren't for coincidence. It's a pity that Voldemort didn't have the aura of the protagonist, and after arranging so many tricks, he actually killed himself in the end. Shaking his head, Eisen restrained his divergent thinking and focused on the research of alchemy. When Eisen left the library, he planned to visit Hagrid and get some hair from other magical creatures, but he ran into Professor McGonagall directly. Professor McGonagall, what's the matter? Looking at the serious Professor McGonagall, Eisen couldn't help asking. Gilderoy had an accident and can no longer teach defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts, so? Do you want me to be the professor of defense against the dark arts? Eisen interrupted Professor McGonagall with a look of surprise. No, What I mean is that Harry and Ron's confinement place has been changed to your office, and I've already informed them. Professor McGonagall said calmly. Okay, I see. Eisen resisted the urge to roll his eyes and nodded at Professor McGonagall. Eisen sighed slightly as Professor McGonagall turned away. It's just that Professor Lockhart's way of confinement is to let Harry and Ron copy the letters from readers, so how will he punish them? Eisen hesitated for a moment. Chapter 70 Interim Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor? Whoosh! A flash of light suddenly appeared, and when he looked up, he could see a transparent phoenix flying in front of Eisen. This is Dumbledore's Patronus? After realizing what the thing in front of him was, Eisen suddenly understood. Looks like Dumbledore has something to do with him. Professor Eisen, please come to my office. After Dumbledore's voice came out, the Patronus dissipated. A few minutes later, when Eisen came to Dumbledore's office, he found that besides Dumbledore, Professor Snape was also here. However, to Eisen's surprise, Snape stared at Dumbledore with a disgruntled expression, as if Dumbledore had done something wrong to him. Professor Dumbledore, what can I do for you? Eisen glanced at the two silently and looked at Dumbledore calmly. Professor Eisen, I need to discuss something with you. Dumbledore said solemnly to Eisen, then glanced at Snape. Snape nodded, turned and left Dumbledore's office without saying anything. What's the matter? Although Snape's action was a bit strange, since it wasn't about Eisen's business, he didn't ask too much. But seeing Dumbledore's solemn expression, Eisen was still a little strange. Gilderoy is no longer the defense against the dark arts professor, Dumbledore said, glancing at Eisen. This made Eisen feel weird, and it seemed that Professor McGonagall had said something similar before. However, Eisen did not speak, but looked at Dumbledore, waiting for him to continue. Seeing that Eisen nodded and said nothing, Dumbledore continued. Severus wanted to be the professor of defense against the dark arts, but I didn't agree. Hearing this, Eisen was stunned. No wonder Snape pulled the elder's face. It turned out that the application for defense against the dark arts class was rejected. The school will cancel the defense against the dark arts class? A thought flashed through his mind, but Eisen said so. No, defense against the dark arts is one of the core subjects at Hogwarts, and it cannot be cancelled. Dumbledore shook his head with a resolute tone. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Eisen resisted the urge to roll his eyes and kept complaining in his heart. Yes, this course is indeed core enough, and the core has been the same for decades, and the professor changes every year. It's really too much. Demented. However, Eisen still didn't understand why Dumbledore kept rejecting Snape's application to teach defense against the dark arts. One must know that Snape was not only effective in the research of potions, but also had a unique insight into the research of defense against the dark arts. This point can be seen from the fact that he was able to create the Shinfeng Shadowless Curse alone. In a way, Snape was very suitable for the position of Professor of Defense against the dark arts. But unfortunately, Snape applied every year and was rejected every year. So, why did Dumbledore reject Snape's application? Thoughts swirled in his mind, and Eisen already had some guesses. Judging from Snape's experience, he surrendered to Voldemort because of his obsession with black magic. But unlike other Death Eaters, Snape was always thinking about Harry's mother, Lily. That's why Snape had to betray Voldemort and go undercover for Dumbledore when Voldemort wanted to kill Lily. Unfortunately, Lily was finally killed by Voldemort. Of course, Dumbledore was well aware of Snape's fondness for the study of the dark arts, even though Snape had turned his back on dark arts. So, if Snape continued to indulge in the power of the dark arts after serving as a professor of defense against the dark arts, sooner or later he might show his darkest side again. Dumbledore himself had turned down the position of Minister for Magic several times. Why? Because he was worried that he would lose himself if he had too much power. Therefore, he felt that if Snape had too much exposure to black magic, he might fall back on Voldemort again. That's probably why Dumbledore would reject Snape's application to teach defense against the dark arts. However, what Dumbledore doesn't know at the moment is that Snape has always loved Lily deeply, so he can cast the same patron saint as Lily, the doe. As for the patron saint, a wizard needs a strong happy emotion, or a positive emotion from the heart to drive it. The book chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years, yet we're reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwoyudu here. Logically speaking, it is impossible for the Death Eaters of the villain camp to cast the Patronus charm, but Snape did it with his love for Lily. So, in theory, if Snape was the defense against the dark arts professor, as long as he still loved Lily, he wouldn't be in deep trouble. But Dumbledore didn't know all this, so he never made Snape the defense against the dark arts professor. So, you mean, after a moment of hesitation, Eisen asked directly, I want you to be the defense against the dark arts professor temporarily. Dumbledore was expressionless, unable to see clearly what he was thinking. Dumbledore said this very calmly, but Eisen couldn't help raising his eyebrows, feeling a little outrageous. Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts, such an important position. Is he able to hold such an important position? No, Professor Dumbledore, to be honest, I'm not suitable to be a professor of defense against the dark arts at all. Eisen waved his hand directly to show his attitude, and then continued to explain the reason. You see, I don't have an in-depth study of black arts, and I don't know how to deal with vampires, werewolves, and magical creatures like Lockhart, and in my case, I'm not qualified to be a professor of defense against the dark arts at all. Look, Gilderoy can be a defense against the dark arts professor, and I don't think you have a problem. Dumbledore's solemn expression subsided, and he said with a little relief, even if Lockhart's adventures are fake, he still needs to study it if he wants to remember it on himself, right? But obviously, I haven't done any research on these. Eisen was slightly taken aback, continued to refute. Yes, I understand that. So what I mean is not that you will be the defense against the dark arts professor next year, but that you will be acting as the defense against the dark arts professor for the rest of the year. Dumbledore nodded, and then said something surprising. So that's the case. Eisen nodded, but remembered what he had said to Professor Mauga before, and felt that things became weird. Didn't other professors know about this? No, it wasn't made public. Dumbledore shook his head. There is a key question. The final exam of this school year is less than 3 weeks away. What am I going to teach them? Eisen asked a new question. This is indeed a problem. You know, the defense against the dark arts class usually teaches students how to deal with dark magic and jinxes, and how to deal with dangers such as vampires and werewolves. But in less than 3 weeks, what can Eisen teach? After all, Eisen is currently good at charms and transfiguration, plus a little research in alchemy, but these are certainly not things that defense against the dark arts should teach. Moreover, even if Eisen intends to teach the second-year little wizard some knowledge, how will he be tested in the exam? Don't forget, the second-grade little wizard has been studying for almost a year. If the exam was based on what Eisen taught, then wouldn't it be a waste of time for them to study for a year? Well, in fact, they have learned from Bai for almost a year, but at any rate, the experiences in Lockhart's book, the means and methods of dealing with werewolves, vampires, female ghosts, etc. are not fake. But if the content in Lockhart's book is still tested, wouldn't it be a waste of time for Eisen to teach others? That's up to you. Dumbledore threw the question back straight away. Okay, I see. Eisen nodded without saying anything more. Chapter 71C of Questions Tactics. Eisen was still thinking about the defense against the dark arts professor when he left Dumbledore's office. To be honest, Eisen would definitely refuse to be the professor of defense against the dark arts directly. But if it's just a few weeks during the school year, Eisen doesn't think it's a big deal. Besides, didn't Dumbledore let him make up his own mind? Then he can continue to teach according to Lockhart's teaching method. Anyway, he reads fragments from Lockhart's works, so who can't read? If you want to say that this teaching method is not very kind, Eisen also thinks it is. But there was no way. The final exam was less than 3 weeks away from this school year, and defense against the dark arts had few classes to attend. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa do install the latest version. In Eisen's view, it is estimated that students will also start to review the homework they have taken before. Therefore, it is not very realistic to teach other things in such a short period of time. So when Eisen returned to the office, he had already figured out what to do. At 8 o'clock that night, Harry and Ron arrived at Eisen's office on time to be confined. Generally speaking, young wizards are put in confinement either to do some physical work or to copy some things as punishment. But as an astronomy professor, Eisen doesn't seem to have much for them to do. After all, Eisen had never had experience in confinement for young wizards either. Therefore, after thinking about it for a long time, Eisen felt that since he was going to act as the professor of defense against the dark arts temporarily, he might as well let them copy the textbooks directly. Eisen's decision directly darkened the faces of Harry and Ron a lot. After copying for a full 2 hours, Eisen saw Harry and Ron complaining so much. It was so pitiful, so he let them leave. It has to be said that copying textbooks as a punishment is a crazy way of punishment. Early the next morning, a group of young wizards gathered around the bulletin board. At some point, a new piece of parchment was nailed to it. The parchment announced that Professor Eisen would be at the end of the school year, interim acting as the professor of the defense against the dark arts class. For the vast majority of people, this incident did not cause any waves. Some young wizards believe that Eisen's abilities are much stronger than Lockhart's. Because in astronomy class, Eisen will always cast some magic from time to time to show the orbit of the planets. But on the contrary, some young wizards think that Eisen's ability is very poor. Because of his duel with Lockhart at the dueling club, he didn't even cast a disarming spell. I think Professor Eisen, like Professor Lockhart, has no real skills. I think Professor Eisen is not bad. His astronomy class is very interesting, isn't it? It's fun, but you don't need magic in astronomy. That's true, but I still think Professor Eisen is better. Of course, for other young wizards, some believe that Professor Eisen is good, and some think that Professor Eisen is the same as Professor Lockhart. But for the trio, this is very exciting news. Harry, what do you think Professor Eisen will teach us? Ron held the bread with butter and jam in his hand and looked at Harry aside as he ate. I don't know, but I think it must be great. Harry shook his head, but anyone could see the smile on his face. Hermione, what do you think? I think you're right, but I don't know what Professor Eisen will teach. Hermione answered while flipping through the books in her hands, with a look of anticipation in her eyes. Maybe Professor Eisen will teach us how to deal with basilisks. Ron's voice trailed off after swallowing a big mouthful of bread. Impossible, Hermione retorted without waiting for Harry to say anything. It is very difficult to deal with basilisks, and it must be something that senior students must learn. Professor Eisen will not teach what about this. Won't teach us to keep playing werewolves and vampires. Ron and Harry looked at each other, then shrugged their shoulders indifferently. You guys eat. I have to leave beforehand. After a moment of silence, Hermione glanced at Harry and Ron, then stood up holding a stack of books. What's the matter? Looking at the thick stack of books and some parchment in Hermione's arms, Harry couldn't help asking. Ron on the side also stopped to look at Hermione. Professor Eisen has something to do with me. After finishing speaking, Hermione turned and left. What can Professor Eisen do with Hermione? Harry looked at Hermione strangely. Don't know, but maybe Hermione will know from Professor Eisen what he's going to teach us. Ron picked up a glass of pumpkin juice and took a sip. Dong dong dong. After knocking on the door, Eisen put down Wandering with Werewolves in his hand. That's right, after acting as defense against the dark arts professor temporarily, Eisen planned to teach them what Lockhart taught them after thinking about it for a while. Of course, what Eisen teaches must be some really useful knowledge in the book. In Lockhart's series of masterpieces, is there real knowledge? The answer is yes, because the adventures in the book are not Lockhart's, but someone else's. This also means that the skills and methods of dealing with danger are no problem. Maybe Lockhart will read a lot of content from the book when he is in class, and the emphasis will be on how to boast. But Eisen's focus is definitely on getting students to learn and remember the skills and ways to deal with danger. As for the question of whether there is enough time, Eisen thinks that there should be no problem if the tactics of the sea are used. That's right, Eisen intends to spread the magic skills taught to the trio, so that all the little wizards can feel the awesomeness of the sea tactics. Come in. Following Eisen's voice, a figure opened the door and walked in. It was Hermione, a sophomore student. Sit. Eisen waved his hand, and a chair was transformed and landed on the opposite side of Eisen. Professor Eisen, here are the materials I prepared. Hermione put the stack of books and some parchments she was carrying on Eisen's desk and sat down. I think you should have some guesses. Although I am the professor of defense against the dark arts temporarily, I don't know what is better to teach you. As soon as Eisen stretched out his hand, the rolls of parchment flew into his hand. Is the professor planning to be like Lockhart? Hermione blinked, staring at Eisen curiously. Yes, you have been studying for a year, and the exam papers will also be selected from textbooks, so I will continue to select content from here for class. This is why I asked you to prepare these materials. Eisen took holding the parchment. He motioned to Hermione. Then, Professor Eisen, you won't be like Professor Lockhart. Seeing Eisen's actions, Hermione's face turned red. Professor Lockhart? Eisen looked at Hermione suspiciously. Long paragraphs of reading from the textbook, and let the students play the roles in it. Hermione glanced at Eisen quietly as she spoke, as if afraid of being discovered by him. Of course not. I will pick out some skills and methods in the textbook about dealing with dangerous incidents. This is the key point for you to remember. Eisen's expression froze, and then he said, although Lockhart's experience is fake, but the content inside is still very useful. But the exam is coming up soon. Is there still time in such a short time? Hermione said with a worried look on her face. Well, what do you think of the sea of questions tactic? Eisen pondered for a moment, then looked at Hermione. Hermione suddenly showed a look of enlightenment. You know, the three of them have used the sea of questions tactic for a long time, and Hermione is very clear about the effect. Therefore, when Eisen said that he planned to use the sea of questions tactic, Hermione understood that this method was very effective for little wizards. Chapter 72, Final Exam. Regarding the matter of acting as the professor of defense against the dark arts temporarily, Eisen basically held the attitude of being pushed out of the shelves and was very casual. After getting some collated materials from Hermione, a top student, Eisen copied dozens of them. After the day's herbal and potions class, Eisen gave the second-year little wizard a painful defense against the dark arts class. For the young wizards, it is a happy thing that Professor Eisen did not recite large content in class. But then, the information that Professor Eisen sorted out from the textbooks, as well as the tactics of the sea of questions announced, completely confused everyone. You know, what is the most important thing in the sea of questions tactics, of course, is the quantity of questions. The three of them had experience in this area, so it was better. The other young wizards just complained in class. Of course, for the young wizards, the luck of the misfortune is that Professor Eisen uses Lockhart's series of masterpieces for his sea tactics. This made them feel a little easier. After one class, Eisen basically didn't give any lectures to the little wizards, just sat quietly on the side, watching the little wizards do the questions there with a sad face. That taste is refreshing. I can't believe that Professor Eisen would use the sea of questions tactics to torment people. After leaving the classroom and returning to the Gryffindor common room, Ron lay on the sofa in a state of distress and said in a miserable tone, "Fortunately, we have experience in this area." Harry nodded. His face was more of a fluke. "But it's very effective, isn't it? Don't forget that your grades have improved a lot last year." Hermione seemed to be in high spirits, and it seemed that the sea tactics were to her liking. "It's a good thing that Professor Eisen only taught us for a few weeks, otherwise, we would be in trouble." Ron had a happy expression on his face again. "That's good. At least the content of the exam won't change too much." As a top student, Hermione obviously focused more on the exam. While the trio was discussing here, Eisen was also feeling some changes in his body. Perhaps because of accepting Dumbledore's suggestion and substituting a defense against the dark arts class for a while, Eisen could feel the power of a curse falling on his head. This kind of power is very subtle, and Eisen felt that if it wasn't for his own gold finger, which made his magic power grow to a very large level, he probably wouldn't be able to feel this power. Moreover, to Eisen's surprise, this subtle curse power didn't directly merge into his body, but stuck outside his body like a stain. After realizing this result, Eisen suddenly understood. This curse should affect his luck. If it lasts for more than a year, then unlucky accidents may fall on his head. However, even so, Eisen is confident that as his strength continues to grow, he is sure to resist this curse. Even, it is not impossible to directly break the curse at that time. However, since he is only serving as the professor of defense against the dark arts for a while now, there is no need to take it too seriously. Of course, when it comes to being cursed by the defense against the dark arts class, Eisen also brought a benefit, that is, he can intuitively study the power of this curse. In the following time, Hogwarts resumed its usual bustle. Although there was Dumbledore's propaganda outside the school, which made the news of Voldemort's complete killing spread out, causing a wave of moderate waves, but the school gradually became tense, because it's not long before the final exam. Ever since Eisen's practice of teaching young wizards defense against the dark arts has spread, several professors have adopted this method to review their homework for their students. This makes the students tense and anxious. Even though calming crystal balls were arranged in every classroom to appease the emotions of the little wizards, it still failed to ease their anxiety. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa install the latest version. However, it was precisely because the exam was approaching that after Eisen taught the trio how to cast the Iron Armor Curse, a defensive spell, he suspended practical training every night. In the first week of June, the final exams for the second graders officially started. In the original plot, because of the Chamber of Secrets incident, the final exam was directly cancelled by Hogwarts. But thanks to Eisen's intervention, the final exams went on as usual. The content of the exams and other courses is not much different from the usual ones. Except for answering the exams, it is just some practical operations. However, the content of the defense against the dark arts exam was slightly changed by Eisen. However, Eisen noticed that many little wizards had expressions of surprise on their faces. Clearly, the question C tactic worked. The exam time lasted for a whole week, and when the little wizards completely got rid of the torment of the exam, the whole Hogwarts fell into a sea of laughter. Of course, the senior students still have to prepare for the wizard-level exam. So many people hide in the library and work hard, and have no time to laugh with the junior wizards. However, as a passerby professor, Eisen never pays attention to those things. In the second week of June, after the final exam results were announced, Eisen officially stepped down from his position as defense against the dark arts professor. At the same time, Eisen intuitively felt that the power of curse that enveloped him disappeared out of thin air. The traces of the curse on the outside of the body were also completely eliminated. Eisen was not surprised by this result. In the office, Eisen looked at the bracelet in front of him. A little bit of blue light was constantly flickering. On the transparent bracelet, a lot of magic for strengthening protection has been applied. Inside the bracelet, there are rune inlays woven with unicorn hair. Slightly different from the previously made healing bracelets, Eisen directly eliminated the ability to heal and strengthened the ability to heal and restore to the extreme, especially for the damage caused by the power of the curse. While being able to resist and break the power of the curse to a great extent, the body heals and returns to its original state. Holding the bracelet in his hand, Eisen pondered. To say that the reason why he was able to research targeted magic items so quickly was due to the curse that shrouded him during this period. Some people may think this is nonsense, because Eisen can experience the fire curse himself, and has done a rough study of black magic, so why couldn't he conduct targeted research before? In fact, the power of the curse has a lot to do with who cast it. Just like Voldemort and Hogwarts students, the power of the killing curse must be different between the two. The same goes for the cursed powers contained in some wicked black arts. If an evil black wizard is driven by extreme negative emotions, then the curse damage caused by casting black magic must be very powerful. Therefore, when Eisen took over as the defense against the dark arts professor, he realized that this was a good opportunity to study the curse cast by the Dark Lord. Although the effect of this curse has been weakened to a certain extent in the protective magic of Hogwarts, its stubborn nature can still be reflected. Therefore, after Eisen experienced the trace of curse power in his body during this period, he started targeted research. And, finally after the final exam, a self-healing bracelet was successfully produced. Chapter 73 Experiment. After picking up the bracelet, Eisen couldn't help feeling a little emotional. Previously, Eisen had obtained immortality from the Philosopher's Stone. In theory, Eisen has to some extent accomplished a so-called ultimate goal. But immortality and immortality are not the same thing. On the surface, immortality is just an endless lifespan. It will not die, but it will still grow old. Immortality is immortality plus immortality. But in fact, whether it is immortality or immortality, there is a very fatal shortcoming. That is, if there is external interference, the state of immortality or immortality is likely to be broken. For example, if Eisen is killed directly, then the immortality feature is likely to be useless. In this regard, Eisen feels that Horcruxes are a bit more capable. Although the method of making Horcruxes is very evil, after splitting the soul, it will cause irreversible damage to itself. But the indestructibility of the Horcrux and the indestructibility of the body are not comparable to the immortality of the Philosopher's Stone. To give a very intuitive example, if Eisen is hit by the Avada Kedavra, then his enchants can be predicted, and he will definitely be killed. Perhaps, after the magic power in Eisen's body accumulates to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, he will be immune to the damage of the Avada Kedavra. But now, this is obviously impossible. And what would happen if Voldemort was hit by the Avada Kedavra curse? A ready-made example was placed in front of Eisen. Voldemort's body was destroyed, but his soul was still not killed. Obviously, the immortality brought about by Horcruxes, as Voldemort said, basically conquered death. If you think about it carefully, you will find that if the ability of the Horcrux is combined with the ability of the Sorcerer's Stone, it is simply the most perfect complement. But obviously, combining the immortality and immortality of the Horcrux and the Philosopher's Stone is something that Eisen simply cannot do at present. And if making a Horcrux makes him difficult to kill, Eisen can't accept it. Therefore, after thinking about it for a while, Eisen decided to settle for the next best thing, and began to study the magical ability of healing and recovery. Of course, this ability is indeed within the category of healing spells, so Eisen's research went a lot smoothly. Moreover, in order to target the powerful curse power contained in the unforgivable curse, Eisen directly simulated a part of his own magic power running in the body and added it to the self-healing bracelet. What kind of effect this would be, whether it could offset the lethal ability of the Avada Kedavra curse, Eisen was not sure. With many thoughts in his mind, Eisen put the bracelet on his wrist, and then his fingers touched his arm. A red light flashed. Then a fiery flame burst out, turning into a sword and cutting open his arm. The pain was quickly transmitted from the arm to the brain, but Eisen's expression did not change at all. With a thought, the cast fierce fire disappeared, and Eisen was cut with a deep scar on his arm. A powerful curse blew deep in the arm, but almost immediately, the self-healing bracelet on Eisen's wrist kicked in. A light blue light flashed, and the power of the curse in the wound on Eisen's arm receded like a tide, and the wound began to heal. Eisen didn't make any other movements, but in his perception, an invisible force in the bracelet was circulating back and forth at the wound on his arm. In just 5 seconds, the power of the curse on Eisen's arm disappeared, and the wound quickly healed and recovered. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years, Yegwa Reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwa here. It seems that the effect is very good, but Eisen's current experiment can only prove that the self-healing bracelet can solve the damage caused by the fierce fire curse. But if Eisen has been in the burning fiend flame, what will happen? He can't predict. In other words, Eisen may have been in a state of burning and self-healing all the time, but the greater probability is that the speed of self-healing cannot keep up with the burning speed of fiend fire, and it will be completely incinerated. To be honest, if the fierce fire curse didn't have a solution, it might be listed as one of the unforgivable curses by the wizarding world. In Eisen's view, the difference between the fierce fire curse and the Avada Kedavra curse is probably that the former is a spell that can cause continuous effects, while the latter is a spell that can cause instant effects. Because of this, Eisen even suspected that the fierce fire curse could only be broken because of its persistent effect. However, Eisen intends to try to see if the self-healing bracelet will work against the Avada Kedavra, but feels that this is a death-seeking behavior. But what makes Eisen's head hurt is, if you don't test it, how do you know that the self-healing bracelet is effective for Avada Kedavra? Now, Eisen is caught in another vicious circle that cannot be broken. Thump thump. After putting away the self-healing bracelet, Eisen tapped his fingers on the table, lost in thought. After a while, Eisen let out a long breath. With a decision that sounds outrageous, it is to conduct in-depth research on Horcruxes. Nowadays, the way Voldemort used to make Horcruxes, Eisen absolutely despises. But to research a Horcrux production method without side effects, Eisen thinks it is very unlikely. Therefore, he has made a long-term plan to tackle the tough problems. In the afternoon, when Eisen came to the auditorium for dinner, he found that the little wizards were very lively during the meal, but they were not discussing about the final exam. What's going on? Everyone is so interested. Eisen came to the trio and asked casually, "Professor, look." Hermione held a newspaper she borrowed from someone unknown in her hand and pointed to a line of writing and looked at Eisen. Gilderoy Lockhart, who stole other people's experiences, will face multiple trials. Such a title caught Eisen's eyes. Didn't he be sent to St. Mungo's? Eisen took the newspaper in surprise. It's cured, but he's been charged with his false experience and may be sent to Azkaban. Ron curled his lips. It's a pity to say, I don't hate Lockhart so much now. Lockhart interviewed wizards who had real-life adventures, obtained stories from them, and used the amnestic charm to make them forget everything. Some victims' memories were permanently damaged. Lockhart will face multiple charges. Looking at the content in the newspaper, Eisen shook his head, not knowing what to say. Please tell us about this matter, no matter at any time. We must not underestimate anyone. After a while, Eisen returned the newspaper to Hermione, and then solemnly warned the few people who would have thought that even the disarming curse cannot be cast. Lockhart turned out to be a master of the Oblivion Curse. It's really scary. Ron and I have been locked up several times in the Lockhart office, Harry said, showing a little bit of fear. After Lockhart made waves at Hogwarts as a false adventurer, no one noticed. Near the end of the semester, the school finally has good news. That is, Professor Sprout's Mandela grass is fully mature. Afterwards, the students who were petrified in the attack all recovered smoothly. The night before the little wizards left Hogwarts, the school held a final dinner. Although the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets was dealt with, on the surface, by Lockhart, Harry was credited with finding the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets, so Gryffindor was awarded 200 points. As for Ron, he also got 100 points for participating in the action. In addition, the two were awarded the Special Contribution Award of the school. Of course, one of the most important things was Dumbledore's announcement that Lockhart would no longer be Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts at Hogwarts next semester. After hearing the news, all the little wizards were overjoyed. Of course, some professors are also applauding. After all, some of them really had enough of Lockhart's posturing. Chapter 74: The End of the School Year and the Second Horcrux. In the third week of June, little wizards will take the Hogwarts Express to go home. In front of the station, the little wizards happily boarded the train, while Eisen stood at the top of the astronomy tower, quietly watching all this from the perspective of God. Percy, Penello, Justin, Luna, Fred, George, Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, Ron Weiss, etc. boarded the train one by one. In his previous life, Eisen read a lot of Hogwarts fanfictions, in which the main character stays at Hogwarts for a year, can meet a lot of people, and get along like a fish in water in the wizarding world. Look at Eisen himself. He has been in Hogwarts for 2 years. Besides the professors and the Savior Trio, who else has Eisen met? Because he is a professor of astronomy, so the little wizards basically know him. Although Eisen has done some things in Hogwarts, because it has not been spread, Eisen still has little sense of presence in the eyes of little wizards. The only time he got the limelight was when Eisen tied Lockhart at a dueling club meeting. But obviously, after so much time, the students have long since forgotten it. The young wizards lined up to board the Hogwarts Express one by one, and Eisen noticed that Draco Malfoy was falling behind. Unlike usual, Draco looked depressed. His two followers, Crabbe and Gore, also followed silently, seeming to have become a lot more low-key. No way. Since Lucius attacked Dumbledore and the plan fell through, Dumbledore mobilized his own power and joined other school managers to drive him out of the school board. Because of this, as Lucius' son, Draco Malfoy was naturally affected. After everyone boarded the train started and slowly disappeared into the distance. When the shadow of the train disappeared from Eisen's god view, he turned off the god view and left from the top of the astronomy tower. After the little wizards all went home, the whole of Hogwarts became quiet. Walking through the corridors of the castle, without the little wizards coming and going and chattering, Eisen felt that the ghosts in the castle that had a low sense of existence became more conspicuous. During the next week, Eisen saw silver-white transparent shadows flashing past from time to time on the way to the library. Since the little wizards left the school, Peeves began to bully other ghosts, but he was always stopped by the Bloody Baron who rushed over. Of course, for Eisen, these ghosts have no effect on him. In addition to the ghosts active in Hogwarts Castle, some professors also stayed behind. For example, Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick and Professor Snape. And, of course, there's Sybil Trelawney, the divination professor. As a professor of divination, Trelawney's reputation at Hogwarts can be described as polarizing. A considerable number of students, including Professor McGonagall, think Trelawney is a crazy liar. It can't be helped, because Trelawney's performance is really crazy. But at the same time, some people think that Trelawney is a real seer, able to make some real and effective predictions that Dumbledore should believe. After all, when Dumbledore interviewed Trelawney in the Hog's Head, she made a real prophecy about a man to be born with the power to defeat Voldemort. Dumbledore also listened to this language before deciding to keep Trelawney at Hogwarts. Of course, in addition to this prophecy, Trelawney also predicted Voldemort's comeback, Dumbledore's departure, and so on. It's just that Eisen has already intervened in this world, and I'm afraid some of the prophecies in it will disappear. In the empty castle, the idle professors had more opportunities to communicate. Perhaps it was because Eisen had a temporary team research experience with Professors McGonagall, Flitwick, and Dumbledore before, so Eisen was a little more comfortable talking with the two professors. At a small gathering, when Eisen was talking to Professor McGonagall about the vanishing curse, Trelawney looked at Eisen with blurred eyes and made a prophecy to him. Ominous, I see ominous. Eisen looked at her in bewilderment. Trelawney was wearing big glasses. From Eisen's point of view, she seemed to be glaring at him. After finishing speaking, he grabbed the wine bottle next to him and took a sip. Sybil, you're drunk? Professor McGonagall turned dark. No, I didn't. I saw a big black dog with a black army covering the sky, and the darkness enveloped you. Trelawney put his arm on Professor McGonagall's shoulder, put down the bottle, and pointed at Eisen with the other hand. Strangely, though, I saw a light. Then Trelawney slumped sideways with a belch. With a flick of his wand, Professor McGonagall dropped Trelawney on the sofa next to him and covered her with a blanket. Big black dog? Eisen murmured. If nothing else, the big black dog should be Sirius Black's animagus. This means that he will escape from Azkaban soon. As for bringing an army that covers the sky and the sun, that's bullshit. Sirius was on Harry Potter's side, and it was impossible to bring any large army. As for being shrouded in darkness, could Voldemort be resurrected? Although Eisen didn't quite understand this, he wasn't too worried. As for the ray of light that Trelawney saw, Eisen didn't understand it at all. After the party ended, Eisen took time to hide his figure and went home. After staying at home for 2 days, having a brief exchange with his parents, and handing over the movie script written by Hermione to the company, Eisen returned to Hogwarts again. Standing in front of the gate of Hogwarts Castle, Eisen was quite emotional. Hogwarts has been established for 1,000 years, and it is not known whether this tranquility can be maintained forever. Eisen, after entering the courtyard, Professor McGonagall came to greet Eisen. What's the matter? Eisen paused and looked at him with a smile. Yes, Dumbledore came back last night and may have something for you. Professor McGonagall nodded, but his expression was not very good. Okay, I'll go find him right away. Seeing Professor McGonagall's expression, Eisen was a little puzzled, but he couldn't ask directly. A few minutes later, Eisen came down the spiral staircase to Dumbledore's office. Professor Dumbledore, I heard from Professor McGonagall. Do you need something for me? Eisen asked directly after opening the door and seeing Dumbledore sitting directly behind the desk. Yes, please sit down. Seeing Eisen come in, Dumbledore smiled and gestured as he spoke. Thank you. What is it? Eisen sat on the chair next to him and looked up at Dumbledore. Dumbledore didn't speak and smiled, rolled up his sleeves and stretched out his right hand, showing it in front of Eisen. Eisen looked over and saw that the healing bracelet on Dumbledore's wrist was flickering and seemed to be working continuously. Then look at its right hand, with a scorched black spot on it. As time passed, bits of black air emerged and dissipated from above. It could be seen that Dumbledore's right hand had been damaged by a very powerful spell. Are you hurt? It's okay. Eisen seemed to have figured out what was going on, but he still pretended to be concerned and frowned. It feels pretty good. Last night Snape gave me a potion that locked the damage on my right hand, Dumbledore said, turning the bracelet on his right hand a bit. But I have to say, it was you who gave me the cure. The bracelet saved my life. It doesn't work that well. Eisen narrowed his eyes slightly, looking at Dumbledore's right hand, his tone a bit puzzled. Yes, the healing bracelet that was given to Dumbledore before, although effective, should not be too powerful. Perhaps I'm lucky enough that it works just right. Dumbledore had a look of relief on his face, and then took out a ring. I was strongly tempted. When I put the ring on, the spell on it was triggered. Fortunately, the bracelet blocked some of the damage, allowing Snape time to expel some of his strength, and the rest of the damage was locked in his hand. But don't worry, I think it will be fully recovered before school starts. Eisen frowned and stepped forward to Dumbledore's side, carefully observing the scorched marks on his right hand. The powerful black magic curse power comes from this ring? Eisen tapped Dumbledore's right hand with his wand, and the white light surged back and forth before stopping. Then, Eisen looked aside at the ring that Dumbledore had placed on the desk. The ring looks ordinary, But what is particularly eye-catching is the black gemstone engraved with Peveril's crest engraved on it. If there is no mistake, this should be the ring of Marvolo Gunter. However, Eisen was surprised that Dumbledore was able to find the second Horcrux so quickly. After all, in the original book, Dumbledore didn't find it until years later. But now, just a few months later, Dumbledore had found the Horcrux. Eisen had to sigh in his heart. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years, Yegwa Reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwa Udo here. Chapter 75, The Wounded Dumbledore. Subscribe. Yes, you guessed it right. Dumbledore looked at his right hand and found that the charred black spots on it were much lighter in color. At the same time, feeling the power of the curse locked in his right hand weakened a little, his eyes flashed a little. Clean. Voldemort's Horcrux. Eisen picked up the ring, felt it carefully, and put it down again. That's right, what you said was right. Tom Riddle made more than one Horcrux. Dumbledore said. His eyes were a little blurred. He is too proud and arrogant to believe that others will investigate him to know the existence of Horcruxes. For Tom, Marvolo Gaunt's ring is a symbol and representative of the identity of Slytherin's descendants. For such a meaningful treasure, Tom made it into a Horcrux and then hid it in Gaunt's in the old house. I think it must not be easy to get it. Eisen's face became very calm. Yes, it was hidden in the ruins of Gaunt's old house, and it was cast with a very powerful protective magic. It took me a lot of thought to get it. Dumbledore said softly. You know it's a Horcrux, and you know Voldemort's character. He will definitely tamper with it. Why do you still wear it? You almost died. Eisen glanced at him, deliberately using this tone come on him. The Resurrection Stone. When Tom made it into a Horcrux, he didn't know that the gem was the Resurrection Stone. Dumbledore froze, and then smiled wryly. I recognized it, and I couldn't help it, so I put it on it. The Resurrection Stone. One of the 3 legendary Deathly Hallows. The gemstone that can resurrect the dead? Eisen's eyes fell on the black gemstone on the ring. If this gem can really bring the dead back to life, then it is definitely one of the most heaven-defying props in the wizarding world. But alas, Eisen knows that it does not have the ability to resurrect the dead. It is indeed a Deathly Hallows, but it cannot really bring the dead back to life. Dumbledore sighed slightly. So, the Deathly Hallows is fake? Eisen showed a look of surprise. No, the Deathly Hallows exist, but they are far less effective than the legendary 3 Hallows. Dumbledore withdrew his right hand, took out his wand, and pointed it at Gaunt's ring. Fierce fire emerged from the tip of Dumbledore's wand, taking the form of a sword, and directly slicing the ring in 2. Now, Voldemort's second Horcrux was destroyed. So, Professor Dumbledore, what are your plans next? Continue to search for Voldemort's other Horcruxes? After watching Dumbledore put away the Resurrection Stone on the broken ring, Eisen stretched and asked calmly said a word. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa Udo install the latest version. At least until my hand is fully recovered. Dumbledore took a deep look at Eisen and raised his right hand as a gesture. Professor Dumbledore, I have to remind you. Eisen crossed his arms and looked solemn. The second Horcrux was found, which means that Voldemort made more than one Horcrux, but as I said last time, Voldemort made 6 Horcruxes. It's just a guess. How many Horcruxes he made? I think it needs further confirmation. Yes, you are right. Dumbledore nodded. But like I said, Horcrux making is a very evil black magic, and a person's soul has a limit. It cannot be split more than once many. So the Horcruxes made by Tom should be similar to what you said. Maybe you need to talk to the former Hogwarts professors. Maybe they know the information about Voldemort making Horcruxes. Eisen changed the subject and gave a little reminder. You're right. When Tom was in Hogwarts, he was very popular with some teachers. I think someone must have taught him the advanced knowledge of making Horcruxes. Dumbledore seemed to think of something. His eyes the light came out. Eisen nodded without speaking. If there is no accident, Dumbledore will check and finally find Slughorn, the former potions professor at Hogwarts. Slughorn is a pleasure-seeking and vain person who likes to associate with famous and successful people. But it has to be said that he is not a bad guy. As a former professor at Hogwarts, he turned a blind eye to mediocre students and paid special attention to those extremely outstanding students. Therefore, Slughorn treated Voldemort very favorably while he was in school. You know, before Voldemort turned black, he was a very good student. Otherwise, he couldn't have become a Slytherin prefect. Unfortunately, Voldemort's ambitions were beyond anyone's imagination. So, relying on Slughorn's care for him, he tricked Slughorn into revealing the taboo information about making Horcruxes. In fact, Dumbledore may have known about the secret between them long before Slughorn resigned the year after Voldemort's downfall. But unfortunately, Dumbledore failed to inquire at the time, which aroused Slughorn's vigilance instead. Subsequently, Slughorn resigned from Hogwarts. This time, Dumbledore's eyes were on Slughorn again, and Eisen was not sure if he could get the real memory from Slughorn. You know, in the original book, Dumbledore still relied on Harry to fool Slughorn after taking the Felicia, so that he could get the other party's real memory. Therefore, Eisen felt that it would not be easy for Dumbledore to find out the truth from Slughorn. Professor Dumbledore, I heard that Felix Felicia can improve people's luck? After pondering for a while, Eisen felt it necessary to mention it. Although I don't know if it will have any effect on Dumbledore's plan, maybe Dumbledore will prepare in advance. No, although Felix Elixir is a powerful potion, it cannot make people have extra good luck out of thin air. Dumbledore narrowed his eyes, as if thinking of something, and continued. It can only make you after drinking it. Take the most correct action. So it is. Eisen whispered, then fell silent. By the way, this is a gift for you. I think you will like it. After a while, Dumbledore seemed to remember something, and after reaching out his hand, a book on the next shelf flew into his hand. Then, Dumbledore handed the book to Eisen. Quest for Ancient Alchemy. Looking at the large characters on the cover, Eisen's heart moved. When he opened the book and saw that the author was Nick Flamel, his face couldn't help showing joy. Thank you, Professor Dumbledore. This really helped me a lot. To be honest, with this book, Eisen's alchemy level should improve a lot. After leaving the principal's office, Eisen came to the top of the astronomy tower in a flash. After a reclining chair was conjured, Eisen lay down on it. Looking at the blue sky with faint light outside the window, Eisen felt a long-lost tranquility. Are there extraterrestrial civilizations in the universe? This is a very interesting question about Eisen's past life, which has attracted the attention of many people, including Eisen. Unfortunately, limited by the development of technology, that has always been an unknown problem. So, in this magical world, is there any extraterrestrial civilization? Eisen was really not sure. Because in this world, the most unscientific thing is magic. Since magic exists, everything else is possible. In other words, if there are extraterrestrial civilizations in this world, Eisen will not be surprised. Even, maybe the origin of magic in this world may be related to extraterrestrial civilizations. After this thought flashed through his mind, the corners of Eisen's mouth couldn't help but twitch. However, Eisen has a hunch that maybe within a few years, he will be able to travel the world at his leisure. After a few more years, he might be able to explore alien planets. Of course, with Eisen's current capabilities, it is obviously impossible to do this. Not only that, but there are still some troubles to solve. For example, the current villain Voldemort, if he is not dealt with, Eisen will always feel a little offended. Voldemort, I don't know if casting the Oblivion Curse on him directly would make him an idiot. Such a thought suddenly popped up in Eisen's mind. Voldemort's occlumency was definitely top-notch, but would it be useful in a sneak attack? Chapter 76. Ways to deal with Avada Kedavra. Lying on the recliner, Eisen's thoughts raced through his mind. Then, he remembered Voldemort's common offensive spell, Avada Kedavra. Thinking of Avada Kedavra, Eisen thought of ways to resist Avada Kedavra. Previously, Eisen imagined what to do if he faced the Avada Kedavra. For a long time, Eisen's idea was to avoid the attack of Avada Kedavra in advance by relying on his nerve reaction speed 4 or 5 times higher than that of ordinary people. Or, simply use the transfiguration technique to conjure some stone slabs, walls, and metal shields anytime, anywhere to force the Avada Kedavra curse. Both approaches are clearly feasible. Because of the casting of Avada Kedavra, the attack speed of this spell is actually limited. So, as long as the reaction speed is fast enough, you can dodge when the spell hits the body. In addition, if you use real objects to resist, although the bunker will be destroyed, the Avada Kedavra will also be offset. Hence, both methods are effective against Avada Kedavra. Leaving aside these methods for now, Eisen suddenly remembered something just now. It seems that I have seen it somewhere in my previous life. There is a method that can open my mind to deal with the Avada Kedavra. That is to wear an anti-death curse armor, stuffed with small animals. After stuffing the clothes with small animals, if you are attacked by Avada Kedavra, the spell will hit the small animals in the clothes first. In this way, the Avada Kedavra is consumed, and people are naturally safe. Theoretically speaking, although this method has a lot of brain holes, it seems to be able to deal with the Avada Kedavra. But in fact, how to wear a dress stuffed with small animals when fighting is also a headache. However, since we are talking about this, even small animals can resist the Avada Kedavra. So we might as well open our minds a bit more and use the bacteria on our body to resist the Avada Kedavra. If it is said that bacteria cannot be resisted, then can the bacteria be resisted if the bacteria are enlarged with the transformation technique and the enlarging spell? Of course, this kind of brain hole Eisen thinks is a bit outrageous. However, there is a situation in the original book, that is, the wand with twin cores will cause the effect of the flashback spell when the spell is attacked. To put it simply, even if a person casts the Avada Kedavra, it will lose its proper effect in this situation. How this happens, Eisen doesn't know. But if he directly customized a wand made of exactly the same material as Voldemort, wouldn't he be invincible? All kinds of thoughts rolled in Eisen's mind, but Eisen didn't have the courage to practice them one by one. But when it comes to dealing with Cadavra, Dumbledore's pet phoenix, Fawkes, is pretty awesome in Eisen's opinion. Judging from the original book, Fawkes is the only creature that can take Voldemort's Avada Kedavra. Although it was reborn in Nirvana on the spot after swallowing the Avada Kedavra curse, it did successfully resist the death curse. Moreover, apart from the rebirth of Nirvana, there are no other side effects. Thinking of this, Eisen had to sigh that the talents of some magical creatures were too powerful. Of course, right now Eisen actually has the means to deal with Avada Kedavra. The first way to deal with it, as mentioned earlier, is to rely on excellent reflexes to avoid the attack of the Avada Kedavra. Eisen is fully capable of doing this. Another method is to use the flying curse or transformation curse to bring rocks, slabs, and other objects in front of you to counteract the Avada Kedavra curse. A more direct and crude method is to use the phantom to leave the place invisibly in an instant. It's just that Eisen felt that his strength was not enough, and he couldn't passively deal with the Avada Kedavra. Passive. The word flashed through Eisen's mind, and he stood up directly from the recliner, with a look of surprise on his face. At this moment, he suddenly discovered a blind spot that he hadn't noticed for a long time. For a long time, he has been considering various magic props, from which to reproduce various extraordinary characteristics, but he has neglected a passive defense prop, the three-piece anti-spell hat. This thing is the work of Wesley's twin brothers. Wearing this thing, as long as the enemy wants to cast a curse on you, you just need to stare at the opponent's eyes, and the curse will be directly reflected back. This thing looks like an artifact. Thinking of this, Eisen wanted to give himself a slap in the face. Why did he forget about this magic item? Although the three-piece anti-spell hat set made by Fred and George does not work against powerful spells, the key point is that Eisen is sure to make more powerful props by himself. If it can be achieved, it means that Eisen can be immune to most curses. Thinking of this, Eisen couldn't help showing a smile on his face. With a thought, the deck chair behind Eisen turned into a card and was put away. Then with a dodge, Eisen disappeared in place. At the same time, Eisen's figure appeared in the library. Living in Hogwarts, those days without students, gave people a particularly relaxed feeling. In Eisen's view, this is completely a kind of paradise-style life. But it's a pity that this way of life only exists because the little wizards are on vacation. It won't be long before the little wizards start school, and the school will be lively again. On July 4th, Eisen's Goldfinger automatically gained a miracle feature as usual. After several years of accumulation, Eisen's strength has grown to a very impressive level. Character: Eisen Turner. Extraordinary talent: Magic, activated. Magic value: 10,960, add 10 points of magic every day. Extraordinary characteristics: excellent level spellcasting characteristics, fit degree 115. Already fused. Legendary level immortality characteristics, already fused. Perfect level observation characteristics, already fused. Miracle feature: 1 copy, automatically get 1 copy every year. How to use the miraculous properties obtained, Eisen has already planned. Eisen took out the crown of Ravenclaw, which he had found in the room of requirement, and tried it out. But unfortunately, perhaps because it was made into a Horcrux by Voldemort, Eisen's Goldfinger didn't respond to it at all. It has to be said that this is a regrettable result. After putting away the crown again, Eisen started experimenting again. He first took out the magic tape recorder he made earlier. As a result, the hint given by Goldfinger did not meet his expectations. This magic tape recorder, which records the sound of Mandela seedlings, gives an excellent level recording sound characteristic and an excellent level sound attack characteristic. If there was a choice, Eisen would of course choose the second extraordinary characteristic. But right now, Eisen has no plans to incorporate this feature. Then, Eisen took out the self-healing bracelet that he made not long ago. The result was not as Eisen expected, and Goldfinger also responded. However, what surprised Eisen was that he thought he could get at least a perfect level of self-healing properties from the self-healing bracelet, but what he didn't expect was that it only gave a quality judgment of excellent level. Such a judgment result made Eisen realize that perhaps the ability of the self-healing bracelet is not as powerful as he thought. For example, when fighting against the Avada Kedavra, it shouldn't be very effective. Without much hesitation, Eisen put the self-healing bracelet away again. The reason why he didn't reproduce it and fuse it into his body was because Eisen had already planned for this miraculous feature. That's right, like the Philosopher's Stone that Eisen was able to touch when the trio was in first grade. One of the special props that Eisen will have access to during this period of third grade is the time turner that Hermione will get. The time converter is a very magical prop that allows people to travel back in time to achieve the purpose of time travel. Of course, in the setting in the original book, wizards can only use it to go back to the past, but not to the future. Chapter 77: The Feasibility of Time Travel. As for magical props like the time converter, Eisen found out that it was made with a spell called the Hour Reversal Charm after further understanding. Obviously, the Hour Reversal spell is a kind of time magic. In fact, it is not surprising that time magic Eisen appears in this world, because it is completely pasteable. After all, this world already has space-type magic such as the untraceable stretching curse and apparition, so it is only natural that time-type magic exists. However, unlike space magic, time magic like the hour reversal spell is very unstable. It is not like apparition. As the spellcaster's proficiency increases, the stability will gradually increase, and finally it will be completely mastered by the spellcaster. Recommended, Yegwa reading and chasing books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa here, everyone can try it soon. As for the hour reversal spell, this spell itself is extremely unstable. Just like Professor Crocker in the Department of Mysteries, as a professional who has been studying time magic all his life, the results of his research show that no matter how the wizard practices it, the hour reversal spell itself is very unstable. If you want to use it, you can only seal it in a small hourglass container and make it into a time converter to improve the stability and reliability of this spell. In this way, wizards can carry it with them and travel in time. Of course, even so, the maximum time for wizards to travel through the time converter should be controlled within 5 hours. Because of the research on time by the Department of Mysteries, the current conclusion is that if one wants to avoid serious harm to the time traveler and time itself, the time limit for time travel is 5 hours. In the original book, Hermione took all the courses through the time turner when she was in the 3rd grade. A full lesson at Hogwarts was 2 hours, which was clearly within the 5-hour limit, so Hermione's use of the time turner was fine. Even so, however, Eisen suspected that Hermione was a little affected. Having been in contact with Hermione for 2 years, Eisen knows what kind of state Hermione is in her studies. It should be very appropriate to describe it with 4 words like a fish in water. But after Hermione used the time turner in the original book, her whole state was not right. Not only the first one to go to the library each day, but also the last one to leave the Gryffindor common room. The long experience made her nervous. This showed that at least Hermione was under some kind of pressure. Otherwise, she wouldn't have turned in the time turner at the end of the semester. Of course, Hermione used the time turner to do another thing besides learning, and that was to save the Hippogriff Buckbeak and Sirius Black with Harry. Time turner has formed a closed loop in this matter, which seems very reasonable. The reason for this, Eisen guessed, was that they did it all in 3 hours. Of course, the reason why 5 hours is the best time to time travel using the time turner is because of the serious consequences of previous experiments. It is said that there was an experiment in the Department of Mysteries in which a witch was trapped in time travel to 1402 for 5 days. As a result, when the witch returned to modern times, her own body was directly subjected to the baptism of time, aging for a full 5 centuries. In the end, the witch died in the spell injury unit of St. Mungo's Hospital for magical injuries and injuries. The body has aged for 5 centuries at once, and there is no doubt that this is an irreparable error. But if you think about it carefully, this kind of consequence does not seem to be a problem for Eisen now. Because Eisen has been able to live forever, then naturally there is no need to worry about the side effects of time travel such as aging of the body. It's just that this kind of damage to the time traveler's body is just one of the consequences. Worse still, another injury was horrific for all. For example, during the 5 days the witch was trapped, the lives of some of the people she encountered were also affected. The intuitive impact is that the descendants of about 25 of them disappeared directly in modern times, because the descendants of those people were not born in modern times at all after being affected. For such consequences, Eisen can actually understand. After all, if the trajectory of one's life is changed, it is not surprising that the future will change. However, time itself is also affected, which Eisen doesn't quite understand. It is said that the day the witch returned to modern times was on Tuesday, but that day lasted for 2.5 days, and the following Thursday ended after only 4 hours. What makes Eisen wonder is how does the wizarding world know that a certain day is a Tuesday? Isn't it determined according to the rotation of the Earth and the calendar? But if there is no difference between the time in the wizarding world and the time in the Muggle world, then Tuesday lasted for 2.5 days, does it mean that the Earth's rotation has actually slowed down by more than double? And only 4 hours passed on Thursday. Does it mean that the Earth's rotation speed has accelerated several times? Such changes, regardless of the possibility of earthquakes and tsunamis, the drastic changes in the magnetic field alone will lead to huge disasters around the world. As a result, the Ministry of Magic just had a lot of trouble covering it up. After pondering for a long time, Eisen felt that this should also be some flaw in the original book. But no matter what, at least Eisen didn't dare to use the hour reversal curse. Even if Eisen got the time converter, the purpose is to make Goldfinger work, to see if he can replicate the time travel feature. If such a goal can be achieved, it will definitely be of great significance to Eisen. This means that time travel is definitely a lot more feasible for Eisen. After concentrating his thoughts, Eisen changed his gaze and saw the scene outside Hogwarts Castle. The sky was clear and cloudless that day, and it looked extraordinarily clear. The sun shines on the green lawn, with a little light, giving people a feeling of vitality. With a slight thought, Eisen turned his gaze to Dumbledore's office, and found that he was not in the office, but was resting in a small bedroom in the back compartment of the office. Since Goldfinger didn't respond to pulling when Claw's diadem, it was only natural to give it to Dumbledore. Thinking in this way, Eisen came to Dumbledore's office in a flash. The office was the same as usual, with portraits of the previous Hogwarts headmasters hanging on the walls. They were snoring softly with their eyes closed, as if they were resting. Behind the huge desk, on a shelf, lay the crumpled and torn sorting hat. On the gilded perch behind the door, Dumbledore's pet phoenix, Fawkes, was fully grown, with bright red and gold feathers, and looked much prettier. After Eisen arrived, it stared at him, making strange noises from time to time. Dumbledore came out of the cubicle, and then saw Eisen standing aside. Professor Eisen, can't you let me, the old man, have a good rest for a while? Professor Dumbledore, how's the injury on your hand? Eisen smiled and changed the subject easily. It's not bad. Maybe you won't have to wait until the new school year starts, and the injury will fully recover. Dumbledore stretched out his right hand, and the scorched black marks on it had faded a lot. This is really good news. Eisen sighed from the bottom of his heart while speaking. After all, it was in Eisen's best interest for Dumbledore to live well. Okay, thank you. But I think you didn't come to me at this time to ask if I'm okay. Dumbledore's face changed, and he looked directly at Eisen, as if waiting for his reaction. That's right, there is something very important to tell you. Eisen didn't care about the change in Dumbledore's expression, but took out something and put it on the desk, then turned to look at Dumbledore. Chapter 78, Another Horcrux and Speculation. This is, Dumbledore's pale blue eyes were fixed on something on the desk, which was a sparkling jewel-encrusted tiara, which looked very charming. If I'm not mistaken, it should be the crown left by one of the founders of Hogwarts, Ms. Rowena Ravenclaw. Eisen nodded and gave such an answer. Extraordinary ingenuity is the greatest wealth of human beings. Dumbledore touched the crown with his fingers and uttered this very famous sentence. A crown that can increase the wisdom of wearing it is really unbelievable. Ms. Luoyina's level of magic is indeed unattainable. Eisen also sighed at this. Unfortunately, after a while, Dumbledore calmed down and sat down on the chair behind the desk, showing regret. Yes, it's a pity that Voldemort made Winkelio's crown into a Horcrux. Eisen took Dumbledore's words and continued. It has lost its original effect. Another Horcrux. Dumbledore's eyes seemed to be a little dazed, and then he looked at Eisen blankly. Eisen, can you tell me how you found it? I mean, it has been lost for a long time. To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, changed sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa Android and Apple are all available. Professor Dumbledore, remember that when you had a premonition that you were about to leave Hogwarts, you told me to protect Harry. Eisen pondered for a moment, and then slowly explained his reasons. Yeah, then, Dumbledore nodded, motioning for Eisen to continue. At that time, I felt that instead of taking care of them all the time, it would be better to teach them some practical spells. Eisen said slowly, with a very calm tone. It just so happened that Lockhart opened a dueling club in school at that time. So I borrowed the machine-formed a dueling team with the nature of actual combat training to train Harry, Hermione, and Ron. However, when looking for a venue for the dueling team, I ran into a problem. But luckily, I discovered a hidden room in Hogwarts by accident. It is a very magical room, which can be expanded according to the needs of its users. Hidden room? Dumbledore looked puzzled. That's right. It's just across from the tapestry of Barnabas on the 8th floor with a troll bat. Just walk back and forth 3 times and meditate on the place you need, and a room will appear there. Eisen's tone didn't fluctuate. I know there is a room there, and the Mirror of Eriste was moved from that room, but you said it will expand according to the user's needs? Dumbledore's eyes flashed, as if thinking of something. That's right, when I needed a place to practice spells, that room perfectly met my needs when it appeared, and I trained Harry and them there. Eisen said calmly, but his tone was the same. Done. Yesterday, I wanted to explore the secrets of that room, so I tried to find a place to hide things, and found the crown of Ravenclaw inside. So it's like this, Dumbledore nodded, showing a dazed look. That room is indeed a good place to hide things. I think Tom must have thought that no one could find that room, so he made the Horcrux hide in. Yes. Eisen agreed with Dumbledore. However, the diadem of Ron Claw was made into a Horcrux by Tom, which means, Dumbledore said, his tone becoming heavy. It means that in Hogwarts School, the other 3 special things like Ron Claw's crown are very likely to be made into Horcruxes by Voldemort. Eisen directly named this conclusion. You mean, Dumbledore looked at Eisen, Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, and Gryffindor's sword. Eisen nodded. No, the Gryffindor sword can only be taken out when the real Gryffindor needs it. Dumbledore was silent for a moment, glanced at the sorting hat on the shelf, and shook his head. If I'm not mistaken, Professor Dumbledore, you belong to Gryffindor College. Eisen frowned slightly, and then glanced at the sorting hat. Maybe, you can take out the Gryffindor sword and check it out? Dumbledore glanced at Eisen, didn't say anything. got up and went to the shelf, picked up the sorting hat, reached in and groped for something inside. A moment later, Dumbledore took out a sword with a ruby-inlaid hilt and Godric Gryffindor engraved on its body. Obviously, the Gryffindor sword is still intact. It was not made into a Horcrux by Tom. Dumbledore said to Eisen after feeling the sword for a while, and then put the Gryffindor sword on the shelf next to the sorting hat. Perhaps Voldemort once thought so, but he just didn't have the chance to get the Gryffindor sword. Nodding, Eisen's tone was very flat. You make a lot of sense, which means that, in addition to Ravenclaw's diadem, Slytherin's locket and Hufflepuff's gold cup are most likely made by Tom into Horcruxes. Dumbledore resumed sitting down. His expression became more solemn. After a while, he sighed, took off his glasses and wiped them with a small piece of velvet. After contemplating for a while, Dumbledore seemed to have thought of something, and said suddenly, "This conclusion just verified the information I got from Hao Chi." Hao Chi. This seemed to be the name of a house elf, and Eisen thought of it as a question. Fortunately, although Eisen is not proficient in memory magic, he can also dig out forgotten memories from the depths of his mind. Yes, a poor house elf. Dumbledore put his glasses back on. More than 50 years ago, Tom, who was still a clerk at Borgin and Box, visited a very rich witch, Hepzibah Smith, the owner of the house elf Hao Chi. But 2 days later, Hepzibah Smith died suddenly. The Ministry of Magic determined that the house elf, Hoki, had mistakenly put poison in her evening cocoa tea. I think this must not be the truth of the matter? Although Eisen used the questioning method, his tone was quite certain. That's right. I think Tom tampered with Hao Chi's memory, making her admit that she had mistakenly put some deadly poison in the hostess cocoa tea. Dumbledore nodded and continued. The Ministry of Magic itself tends to use suspected Hao Chi, so after the old Hao Chi admitted that she had put something in the drink, the Ministry of Magic stopped investigating and locked her in Azkaban. When I got these memories from Hao Chi had almost reached the end of her life, and she died in Azkaban not long after. At that time, the Hepzibah family discovered that 2 of Hepzibah Smith's most valuable treasures, Slytherin's locket and Hufflepuff's gold cup, were missing. It took them a long time to figure this out because she had so many secret treasure locations. And, unfortunately, Tom Riddle resigned from Bokenbach before then and disappeared. This means that Voldemort does know about Slytherin's locket and Hufflepuff's gold cup. Moreover, when these 2 valuable treasures were lost, Voldemort disappeared, which basically means that Voldemort stole them. Eisen concluded. Yes, I only thought of these possibilities when I saw you put in front of me the diadem of Raw and Claw that had been made into a Horcrux. Dumbledore's face showed a little relief. In this case, together with the diary, Gaunt's ring and Ravenclaw's crown, plus Hufflepuff's gold cup and Slytherin's locket, there are 5 Horcruxes. The corners of Eisen's mouth curled up slightly up. Also, Harry Potter. Dumbledore's mood was visibly lowered when Harry was mentioned. I don't think Voldemort knew he had made Harry a Horcrux by accident. Eisen pointed out. You mean, Tom made another Horcrux? Dumbledore frowned slightly. That's right, maybe Voldemort made another Horcrux. However, it's also possible that Voldemort was destroyed by the rebounding death curse before he could make the last Horcrux. Eisen suggested another possibility. In fact, that's pretty much the truth. As for the Horcrux Nagini that Voldemort made last, it will not be made until he is resurrected again. Chapter 79 Before School Starts. After leaving Dumbledore's office, Eisen was still a little dazed. Perhaps because Eisen found 2 Horcruxes in a row, Dumbledore thought that Eisen was related to Voldemort's Horcruxes. Therefore, Dumbledore directly recreated Slytherin's locket and Hufflepuff's golden cup from memory, and let Eisen see what they looked like. This made Eisen couldn't help but slander. Maybe Dumbledore was going to entrust him with the task of finding the Horcrux? At dawn the next day, before dawn, a downpour hit Hogwarts Castle. Lightning streaked across the sky from time to time, adding a bit of mystery to the whole castle. Eisen stood near the window inside the astronomical tower, watching the rain falling like layers of curtains outside, covering the forbidden forest and mountains in the distance like a lake. During this period of time, Eisen suddenly fell in love with the feeling of standing in the astronomy tower and looking at the scenery outside. After a while, Eisen left here and walked towards the library. Now, since Dumbledore already knew the information about the other 2 Horcruxes, Dumbledore would find them without his saying a word. As for Eisen himself, he had just obtained Nick Flamel's Secrets of Ancient Alchemy from Dumbledore, and Eisen felt that he needed to study it carefully. Time passed slowly, and for Eisen, every day was still very fulfilling. In addition to practicing various spells, Eisen devoted part of his energy to studying alchemy. It has to be said that with Quest for Ancient Alchemy, Eisen quickly absorbed the knowledge and experience of alchemy. At the end of July, a small incident discovered by accident caused Eisen's mind to stir a bit. On this day, while eating, Eisen was attracted by a piece of news from the Daily Prophet. The above content makes Eisen feel both unexpected and natural. Ministry of Magic Staff wins award. Arthur Weasley, director of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Department at the Ministry of Magic, has received the Daily Prophet's annual Galleon Award. An elated Mr. Weasley told the Daily Prophet, "We're going to spend the money on a summer trip to Egypt. Our oldest son Bill is in Egypt doing spell-breaking work for Gringotts Wizarding Bank." Next to the content is a black and white photo of the characters in motion. Wesley's family of 9 stood in front of the pyramid, waving their arms forward. In addition to Mr. Wesley and Mrs. Weasley, their 6 sons and 1 daughter also showed smiles. Ron stood in the middle of the photo, with his pet Scabbers on his shoulders. It looks like the Wesleys will be in Egypt for a month, and they'll be back before Hogwarts starts. However, seeing Banban's figure majestically appearing in the Daily Prophet daily, Eisen expected that Sirius Black might be about to escape from prison. However, when it comes to Azkaban, Eisen finds one thing very strange. That is, there should be many powerful criminals in the entire wizarding world, but why only Sirius Black was able to successfully escape from prison on his own? You know, Azkaban is not a benign place. It is located on an isolated island in the waters of the North Sea. For the prisoners, even if they were able to escape from their cells after their wands were taken away, it would probably be difficult for them to cross the sea and escape to land. Besides, the caretakers of Azkaban are a bunch of Dementors. Dementors can absorb people's happy emotions. With this thing guarding them, the prisoners of Azkaban probably have no way or energy to think about how to escape. Not to mention, it is impossible for an important place like Azkaban not to have some powerful protective magic. Therefore, it is almost impossible for the prisoners of Azkaban to escape from it. For example, Grindelwald, the first-generation Dark Lord, even if he was imprisoned in Azkaban, he managed to escape by changing his appearance with Polyjuice Potion. However, Sirius Black accomplished an unprecedented feat and escaped from Azkaban alone. After thinking about it, Eisen felt that the only difference between Sirius Black and others was that he was an animagus. He can turn into a dog. Perhaps, Sirius would be less affected by the Dementors when he was turned into a dog. So after being imprisoned for more than 10 years, Sirius has not lost his mind. As for how he escaped across the sea to the island of England, could it be because dogs can swim? After thinking of this possibility, Eisen didn't know what to say for a while. The next day, as Eisen expected, news spread that Sirius had successfully escaped from Azkaban. Eisen, who took the time to leave Hogwarts for business, heard a lot of people talking about it when he returned. Even, this incident was broadcast as hot news on the television stations of the Muggle world. Of course, while Eisen was still busy with his own affairs, the savior Harry lived a miserable life again. Ron traveled to Egypt with his family, and Hermione went to France with his family. Only Harry, who lived in the Dursleys' house, had to admit in front of Aunt Maggie that he went to the St. Bruce Security Center in order to get Uncle Vernon to sign the form agreeing for third-year students to visit Hogsmeade Village, delinquent school. Of course, Harry's Aunt Maggie said a lot of bad things during the period, which made Harry very angry. So, Harry, who was furious, directly inflated the opponent into a bulging ball, causing the opponent to float. Knowing that he had made a big mistake, Harry escaped from home in a hurry, then unintentionally raised his wand to summon the night bus, and experienced what is called coldness and shaking. Eisen didn't pay much attention to what happened to the savior. He knew that, if nothing else, Harry would spend a month at the Leaky Cauldron before taking the Hogwarts Express to school with Ron and Hermione. Shall we capture a Dementor for research? At this time, a thought suddenly popped up in Eisen. He knew that on the way to Hogwarts, the trio would encounter Dementors for the first time. As for why Dementors are studied, it is mainly because Dementors are too powerful. For example, all magic does not work on Dementors except the Patronus Charm. Even if it is the Patronus Charm, it can only resist and drive away the Dementors, but cannot kill the Dementors. Therefore, this feature is a feature that Eisen is very envious of. If Eisen can strip this feature and use it on himself, he can basically go sideways. As for whether capturing a Dementor would draw the attention of the Ministry of Magic, Eisen didn't think it would be a problem. You know, in the original book, after Kingsley Shacklebolt became the Minister of Magic, he did the act of expelling the Dementors. It can be seen that Dementors are not a rare thing. After making up his mind, Eisen made preparations to capture the Dementors. On this day, Eisen left Hogwarts and moved to his secret base. Speaking of which, setting up a secret base for himself was just a small move by Eisen on a whim. After all, Eisen was planning to research and improve Horcruxes, so the location couldn't be Hogwarts. As for the Room of Requirement, Eisen thinks it's not as safe as it thinks it is. So, in his spare time, Eisen dug a secret base directly deep in the Antarctic Glacier. Recommended, Yegwa reading and chasing books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa here, everyone can try it soon. Fortunately, Eisen's invisible phantom is very convenient to move, coupled with magic means, so the construction of the secret base is extremely simple. After adding spells such as All Protection, Impossibility, and Invisibility to the base, Eisen drew a compartment next to the alchemy laboratory room, intending to set up the Dementor prison. As for how to capture the Dementors, Eisen has already made some preparations. Since the only spell that works on Dementors is the Patronus, Eisen is going to figure it out. In the room of the alchemy laboratory, the icy air was constantly pouring from the surroundings, but for Eisen, these were not a problem. A clear and transparent ice table was placed in front of Eisen, on which a crystal ball was shining with a little bit of luster. The inside of the crystal ball was hollowed out by Eisen, leaving an inch-thick crystal wall. Calling the Guardian, the patron saint spell was cast, and a faint silver light emerged from Eisen's finger, continuously flowing on a strand of unicorn hair. Eisen didn't cast the Patronus at full strength, so the full Patronus didn't show up. After the silver light on the unicorn's hair became bright, Eisen began to cast the Patronus charm with all his strength, casting his own Patronus. Call God Guard. Afterwards, a silver chain quickly formed in front of Eisen, which looked like a metal object. The silver luster on it quickly restrained, and then turned into a silver halo to wrap the entire room. Chapter 80. Capturing Dementors, Part 1. That's right, unlike other patron saints, what Eisen casts is not so much a patron saint as a guardian deity. Because the patron saint of Eisen is a silver chain. When Eisen successfully cast the Patronus for the first time, he was stunned for a long time when he saw that his Patronus was actually a chain. After all, it's a pretty outrageous thing to do. But later, Eisen gradually looked away. As for why his Patronus is different from other people's, Eisen didn't want to understand, but guessed that it might have something to do with his gold finger. Of course, there is another difference. Although other people's patron saints can release entities, they still look relatively virtual. Unlike Eisen's patron saint, who can directly change into a metal chain that looks like a substance according to his mind. This is also the biggest reason why Eisen is unwilling to use the patron saint to spread the news in front of others. After all, it is too conspicuous. However, this situation made Eisen very puzzled. That is, if he transforms into animagus, will the animals he transforms into random changes, or will he become chains? This caused Eisen a lot of headaches. The halo of light formed by the silver chains wrapped the room, and then a faint luster appeared, and a force permeated the entire room in Eisen's perception. Eisen ignored this, and instead focused on the unicorn hair in his hand. The silver light flickered on it, and gradually under Eisen's control, it wove out of thin air. A series of ancient magic texts emerged out of thin air, shrouded in the light of the patron saint, and then combined and engraved on the unicorn hair. This is a magical method, which is also mixed with the concept of conversion spell in the branch of transfiguration. This means does not exist in theory, but when Eisen's will is strong enough, this means is very reasonable. Gradually, the luster of the silver chain patron saint faded away, and the unicorn hair in Eisen's hand was braided into a smaller silver chain. Feeling it carefully, Eisen found that the small silver chain made of unicorn hair already had the characteristics and aura of the patron saint on it. With a thought, the small chain in Eisen's hand rose into the air and plunged into the crystal ball on the table. Walking in the crystal wall of the crystal ball, they finally connect end to end to form a flawless ring. Afterwards, the silver chain covering the entire room disappeared under the control of Eisen's thoughts. Looking at the crystal ball on the table, after a few laps of the faint silver light, the luster gradually faded. After taking a long breath, Eisen nodded in satisfaction. Although his method was implemented for the first time, Eisen had no doubts about whether he could effectively catch the Dementor. To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, change sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa Udo Android and Apple are all available. After putting away the crystal ball, Eisen left the secret base in a flash. Next, it is time to wait for the Dementor to appear. On September 1st, Eisen arrived at King's Cross Station after eating early in the morning. Since the purpose of this operation was to capture the Dementors, Eisen put a disillusionment charm on himself to avoid being seen by others. At 10:40, Eisen saw the figures of Harry and others from the perspective of God. A group of people got off the two cars, and each carried their luggage to platform 9 3/4. After they all passed through the wall and entered the platform on the other side, and boarded the Hogwarts Express, Eisen followed him to platform 9 3/4 with an invisible phantom. Seeing that the platform was full of wizards and witches sending their children to school, Eisen couldn't help but sigh. This is not the first time he has stood on platform 9 3/4. The old-fashioned steam locomotive parked on the track next to it was still emitting smoke. Every time he saw this scene, he gave Eisen the illusion of turning back time and space. For ordinary muggles, 1993 was already the information age, but for the wizarding world, it seemed that they were still stuck in the steam age. I don't know when the Hogwarts Express can be replaced by a high-speed rail. Such thoughts swirled in Eisen's mind, and then made Eisen laugh again. For the wizarding world who is unwilling to change, perhaps this ridiculous idea will never be realized. Of course, times have changed, and no one knows what will happen in the future. In Eisen's sight, Mr. Weasley led Percy, Fred, George and others through the full compartments, entered a very empty compartment, and helped put the suitcases in. Then the Wesleys said goodbye to each of the children. Woo! At 11 o'clock, The Hogwarts Express whistled and set off in the direction of Hogwarts. Eisen didn't board the train, but dodged, teleported to the top of the last carriage of the train, and sat down cross-legged quietly. Looking across the carriage, Eisen could see that there was a person sitting by the window who seemed to be in a deep sleep. The man was wearing a battered wizard's robe, patched in several places, which looked to be aged. He has a sickly face and looks exhausted. Although he is only in his 30s, his light brown hair has a lot of gray hair mixed in. If there is no accident, this is Hogwarts' defense against the dark arts professor for the new school year, Remus Lupin. Lupin had an unfortunate experience in his early years because his father offended the werewolf Fenrir Greyback. As a result, the werewolf got his revenge on Lupin. So, when Lupin was 4 years old, Lupin was bitten by a werewolf and turned into a werewolf. The werewolves in this world are very strange monsters. They will completely lose their sanity on the night of the full moon and will attack their relatives and friends after becoming fierce. So, after Lupin turned into a werewolf, his parents basically gave up on sending him to Hogwarts. But after Dumbledore became headmaster, he planted a whomping willow on the school grounds to cover the passage leading to the Hogsmeade Shrieking Shack. In this way, when Lupin is in school, every full moon night, he can go to the Screaming Shack to transform. And every full moon night, the screams and roars of Lupin's transformation in the Shrieking Shack caused rumors of ferocious ghosts to spread in Hogsmeade Village. In response, Dumbledore encourages the spread of rumors as a way to keep people away from the Shrieking Shack. In this way, people's safety is guaranteed. In this regard, Eisen can only say that the headmaster Dumbledore is indeed very responsible and tried every means to get Lupin a Hogwarts education. However, the werewolf in this world, in Eisen's opinion, does not seem to be a blood transformation, but more like a transformation brought about by a disease, and it is still an incurable disease. Even the Wolfbane potion formulated by Professor Snape can only suppress the ferocity of werewolves on a full moon night and restore their sanity, but cannot completely cure them. Therefore, there is one more thing Eisen needs to pay attention to in this world, and that is to be careful not to be bitten by a werewolf. Because if bitten by a werewolf, Eisen is not sure that he can solve it. After all, the whole wizarding world, including Dumbledore, couldn't solve the werewolf problem. Of course, he didn't think he would be safe after being bitten by a werewolf. However, then again, if the science of potions in the wizarding world develops further, there may not be any potions that can completely cure werewolves in the future. If that's the case, and the werewolf transformation is controllable and rational, it's just another animagus transformation. After all, the potion of Wolfsbane has been able to restore the werewolves to sanity on the night of the full moon, and no one is sure that there will be a potion with better effect in the future. The Hogwarts Express turned a corner, and Eisen saw Harry, Ron, and Hermione enter the carriage that Lupin was in his line of sight. Apparently, the trio wandered around until it was only this car that was found to be vacant. The three of them entered the carriage, closed the door, and sat a little away from the window. It could be seen that the three of them were a little apprehensive about the sudden appearance of an adult wizard on the Hogwarts train. Chapter 81. Capturing Dementors, Part 2. Who do you think he is? Ron said suddenly after sitting down. It seemed that the sudden appearance of adults on the Hogwarts Express caught their attention. Professor Remus John Lupin, whispered Hermione. After seeing her again for 2 months, Eisen was surprised to find that Hermione seemed to have taken hormones, and her height had increased a lot. Moreover, not only did her face become a little thinner, but her figure also became more slender. The 4 words, cardamom years, are really appropriate for Hermione at this time. How do you know? You know him? Harry was taken aback. Isn't it written on his suitcase? Hermione said, pointing to the luggage rack above Lupin's head, on which was a slightly worn-out suitcase tied with many ropes. In one corner was stamped, Remus John Lupin, with the letters peeling off. What do you think he'll teach us? Looking at Lupin, who was still sleeping on his side, Ron looked at the two of them. Isn't that obvious? Hermione rolled her eyes and whispered, with Lockhart gone, there's only one professorship vacant at Hogwarts, Defense Against the Dark Arts, isn't it? The Defense Against the Dark Arts class is indeed difficult for the trio to describe. In first grade, Professor Quirrell taught the class. In the second grade, it was replaced by Professor Lockhart. In the third grade, it was replaced by Professor Lupin. The three of them had vaguely known some rumors that every professor in this course could not teach for a full year. Then I really hope he's up to it. Seeing Lupin's morbid expression, Ron became suspicious. He looks bad, like he's going to fall if he casts a spell. I think since Dumbledore chose him, there should be no problem. Hermione looked calm. As if Lockhart wasn't Dumbledore's choice, Ron curled his lips, then turned to look at Harry. What did you tell us earlier? Harry's expression was shocked, and he told him all the private warnings from the Wesleys and his wife. Hermione covered her mouth with her hands, then put it down and said worriedly, Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban to find you? Oh, Harry, then you must be careful, very careful. You don't ask for trouble, Harry. Of course I won't ask for trouble. Harry was suddenly annoyed. It's usually the trouble that finds me. How stupid would Harry be to go after a lunatic who wanted to kill him? Ron shuddered. It's a good thing we're going to Hogwarts, and with Dumbledore at the school, he wouldn't dare to go there, Hermione said, looking at Harry. I mean, as long as you don't run around, there won't be any dangerous. Hermione's right. Where's the noise? Ron nodded, and suddenly looked around. The faint but sharp whistle made Ron frown. It came from your suitcase, Harry. Ron stood up and took Harry's suitcase off the luggage rack and weighed it in his hand. Harry, your suitcase didn't contain anything? That's right. But you have to put on a show, right? Harry gestured with his hand and showed the storage ring in front of the two of them. Afterwards, he stepped forward and took out a pocket-looking glass from the suitcase. Put it back in the suitcase or wake him up. The sight glass screeched in alarm, causing Hermione to frown and point to Professor Lupin beside him. Afterwards, Harry took out a pair of old socks, wrapped the looking glass, and stuffed it into the suitcase. With the case closed, the sound is barely audible. We can check it out at Hogwarts, said Ron, sitting down. Davy's Bance sells this stuff. Fred and George told me about it. It's in Hogsmeade, isn't it? Hermione said sharply. I read that it's the only place in England that doesn't have muggles. Yeah, I want to go to the Honeydukes candy store, Ron said, drooling from the corners of his mouth and a dreamy expression on his face. It's a great idea to get away from school for a while and explore Hogsmeade, isn't it? Seeing Ron's expression, Hermione froze and looked at Harry. Yes, that's right. You must tell me when you feel this way, Harry said in a muffled voice, his tones suddenly lowered. What do you mean? Ron looked at Harry in surprise, as if awakened from a daydream. The Dursleys didn't sign that consent form for me, and I met Fudge at the Leaky Cauldron, and he wouldn't sign it for me either. I can't go. Harry explained why. Aren't you allowed to go? Ron froze for a moment, then seemed to think of something. Maybe, Professor McGonagall, no, Professor Eisen can sign for you. Otherwise, we can ask Fred and George directly. They know that there are many secret passages in the castle that can lead to the outside. No, Ron. Hermione retorted loudly. You just said that Sirius Black is still looking for Harry. Harry is safest staying in Hogwarts. I don't think Harry should leave the school dash. But if we're with Harry, he wouldn't dare, Ron wanted to retort. But his voice trailed off when Hermione looked sullen. Eisen, who was sitting on the top of the car, gradually felt drowsy when he heard the voice of the trio. Feeling the speed of the Hogwarts Express going north, Eisen felt very moving. After the time came in the afternoon, the sky gradually became gloomy. The clouds in the sky gradually thickened, and it didn't take long for it to rain. When the raindrops fell on top of Eisen's head, they seemed to have touched an invisible cover and slid to both sides. The wind roared unknowingly, and the raindrops became bigger and bigger. The Hogwarts Express train went slower and slower, and gradually stopped. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa You Do install the latest version. Creak, creak. A short and piercing sound came, and a black shadow rushed towards the Hogwarts Express. Afterwards, bursts of icy coldness seemed to emerge out of thin air, trying to freeze everything. With God's perspective fully open, Eisen saw that the black shadow was a monster in a cloak floating in the air. The monster's face was completely covered by the turban, and its two hands protruded from under the cloak, shimmering, somewhat transparent, but it seemed to be the color of something dead and soaked in water, a little gray and knotted scab. There is no doubt that this thing is a Dementor. The Dementor got into the car and seemed to be sucking something. The little wizards in the carriage were in complete chaos. Facing the Dementor, Harry seemed to remember something horrible, then slipped from his seat and passed out. Seeing that the Dementors were about to show their power, Lupin, who had fallen asleep at the critical moment, woke up, grabbed his wand and cast a call of God protection on the Dementors. Then, a silver wolf appeared out of nowhere and drove the Dementor out of the car. Seeing this, Eisen had a thought, and with a flash of his invisibility, he jumped to the side of the Dementor out of thin air. Then, the surrounding air quickly twisted, and the surrounding space seemed to be compressed, binding the Dementor there. Afterwards, Eisen took out the crystal ball cage prepared in advance. While thinking about it, you can see that the Dementor shrinks rapidly, and the silver chain in the crystal ball emerges from it, ties up the Dementor, and then returns to the crystal ball. Almost instantly, Eisen had managed to capture a Dementor. Then, without caring about anything else, a phantom came to the secret base invisibly. After entering the cubicle dedicated to Dementors, Eisen placed the crystal ball on a transparent ice table. In the crystal ball space, the shrunken Dementors clashed left and right, but they couldn't break through the crystal wall of the crystal ball to escape. The silver chains in the crystal wall glowed with a faint silver light. After pondering for a moment, Eisen took out a blank crystal ball and set it aside, and began to cast magic. Since the magic power in his body exceeded 10,000, all kinds of magic methods have become more arbitrary. Eisen first released the silver chain of the Patronus and imbued its power into the crystal wall of the Dementor. Then, a spell was cast to connect the two crystal balls. Fingers slid across the air, and one after another runes condensed in the air, floating above the crystal ball in a fixed frame. Afterwards, the cold air around the room gradually gathered, converged, condensed, and then turned into streaks of silver energy into the runes, and then converted into power and poured into the crystal ball that held the Dementor. In the crystal ball where the Dementors were held, the silver chains in the crystal wall emitted a faint silver light. The silver light gathered and transmitted out. After passing through the Dementors, it condensed and rushed to another crystal ball. This crystal ball will surge with a force every minute, constantly pulling the surrounding cold air and gathering it in the room. Then it is condensed and turned into energy to enter the runes above. When Eisen stopped all his movements, the two crystal balls and the runes floating above seemed to form a loop, which was constantly running. Chapter 82, Vision. After deciding to capture the Dementors for research, Eisen stepped up his research on alchemy during this period of time. With Nick Flamel's ancient alchemy quest, Eisen has advanced more in alchemy than he could have imagined. Every time he felt that he had made some progress, Eisen would take a look at the alchemy experience presented by Dumbledore earlier. Even, Eisen would find time to discuss with Dumbledore in his free time. Therefore, in less than a month, Eisen's alchemy technique has reached a very high level. In this regard, even Dumbledore sighed, saying that Eisen's alchemy talent is enviable. Eisen, however, has doubts. On the one hand, it is because Eisen's whimsy is really different from ordinary wizards. On the other hand, it may have a lot to do with the profound magic power in Eisen's body. After capturing the Dementor, Eisen began an experiment. Previously, Eisen felt that there might be a sense of inability to start research on Dementors, but fortunately, Dementors can still be restrained by the Patronus charm. Therefore, Eisen started from this aspect and conducted research on Dementors. Speaking of which, I don't know if it's because of Eisen's increased strength. After he captured the Dementors, he felt that the power of his patron saint could not only expel and suppress the Dementors, but also faintly cleanse the characteristics of the Dementors. Lose. Recommended. Yegwa reading and chasing books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa here. Everyone can try it soon. This means that if Eisen uses the Patronus to deal with the Dementors for a long time, it seems that they can directly annihilate the Dementors roughly. Although this speed may be very slow, for Eisen, it is definitely a pleasant surprise. Of course, for Eisen, since it can cause fundamental damage to the Dementor. Then Eisen directly considered using the power of the patron saint to preserve the annihilated characteristics of the Dementor. Just like his gold finger, it survived in another crystal ball after defeating the characteristics of the Dementor. In this way, it seems that he can get an item with the characteristics of a Dementor. Since it took a long time to try to determine whether it was successful, Eisen simply cast a spell to gather the surrounding cold air to power the crystal ball conversion. Seeing the constantly rotating crystal ball on the ice table, Eisen had a premonition that maybe a few years later, he would really be able to get an exceptionally powerful magic item. As for what kind of characteristics the props will have, Eisen is not sure. However, after all the means were completed, Eisen still couldn't believe it. As far as his alchemy level is concerned, Eisen doesn't believe that he is really capable of dealing with Dementors, but he just achieved the estimated purpose. It seems that Goldfinger's influence on me should be more than just the one shown on the virtual panel. After thinking for a while, Eisen said thoughtfully. The reason for saying this, Eisen has a few guesses. First, after his Patronus is cast, it is completely different from other wizards. This point is very strange. Second, when his strength has grown to this level, he discovered that his patron saint has abilities a little bit similar to Goldfinger. It's just that Goldfinger can reproduce characteristics from props, and his patron saint can affect the characteristics of creatures. As for the third point, Eisen still needs to confirm his guess in the next research on Horcruxes. In addition, if nothing else, just talk about Eisen's overall physical fitness. Although Eisen spent 2 years at Hogwarts, he basically never exercised physically. But right now, his overall physical fitness is still growing slowly. With a thought, Eisen stepped outside into the ice and snow. Without using any other means, he just walked and ran. After 10 minutes, Eisen stopped. By this time, he had run 10 miles. A little bit of sweat seeped from Eisen's head, and with a thought, Eisen returned to his original appearance after the magic power flowed through his whole body. Obviously, he has already reached the level of Captain America by virtue of his physical strength alone. Seeing that his physical fitness has been slowly improving, Eisen even has the urge to learn fighting skills. Tai Chi, Ba Chi, Wing Chun, Sanda, Muay Thai, etc. He can learn everything he can. Because in Eisen's view, with such good physical fitness, it would be a waste if you don't learn fighting skills. Originally, it was normal for such thoughts to appear in Eisen's mind. After all, learning fighting skills can indeed improve his combat effectiveness. However, there was a problem before him. Just learn these fighting skills, but it doesn't have any effect on magic, which is quite tangled. You said let Captain America fight the wizard. What is the consequence? Eisen thinks Captain America might break the wizard's wand by throwing his shield and win. But if the wizard's reaction is fast, and he uses the obstacle spell and the stun spell, Captain America will not be able to do it. Of course, there is another very important point, that is, the level of magic idealism in this world is too high. This point is extremely unfriendly to people who don't know magic. However, when it comes to Captain America, Eisen can't help but think of the mage in that world. That's right, those battle mages who can open portals in Carmitage. The wizards in that world are completely different professions from the wizards in Eisen's world. The most intuitive difference is that the magic power in the wizards in Eisen's world will only grow with age. As for the mages of Carmitage, their strength can be cultivated. It's nothing more than cultivation. The energy they use when casting spells is all borrowed. Whether it is borrowing the power of Emperor Weishan, or borrowing the power of demon gods from other dimensions, it is a relationship of borrowing. There is a price to be paid for this method of casting spells. But in the world where Eisen lives, the method of casting spells is more like using one's own power directly. Therefore, there is no price to pay. As for which one is more powerful, Eisen feels that it is difficult to compare. After all, the upper limit of the mages in Marvel can break through the sky, and it is easy to roam the multiverse with strength. In the world where Eisen lives, let alone the concept of multiverse, even in this single universe, wizards are trapped on the earth. In such a comparison, the world where Eisen lives, the level of magic is simply not a piece of shit. But in such a world, space magic that can move instantly and time magic that can travel in time exist. Therefore, Eisen doesn't think there is anything to be tangled about. In a flash, Eisen returned to the secret base. After seeing that the circulation between the crystal balls was still running, Eisen came to the alchemy laboratory next to him. The tool table in the laboratory is carved out of enchanted ice cubes. After changing the properties of ice, it makes Eisen feel very convenient to use. On the table was a purple wizard's robe, which looked ordinary and nothing special. Just when Eisen stepped forward to make a move, he stopped and remembered something. Afterwards, Eisen turned around and walked to the field next to the table and started pacing. Previously, Eisen thought wildly and thought of the upper limit of Kamitage's magic, but now he suddenly thought of a method, and I don't know if it can be researched here. As for the method, of course it can make people's souls go out of their bodies, astral projection. This is what the Ancient One mage used when he broke Strange's worldview and led him into the gate of the magical world. Of course, Eisen does not expect to be able to travel through the multiverse through this method. What he thinks is, if a similar method can be developed, can it be used directly on Harry Potter? There is nothing to hide. To create such a magic out of thin air in other worlds, Eisen thinks it is very unlikely, but if it is in this world, the possibility is quite high. There is only one reason. The magic in this world is idealistic and magical enough. Taking a long breath, Eisen disappeared into the secret base in a flash. When Eisen reappeared, he had already arrived at Hogwarts. Since the trio side is fine, there's no need for Eisen to pay attention. So, when Eisen came to Hogwarts, he went directly to Dumbledore's office. Chapter 1. Another year begins. Professor Eisen? What's the matter? The opening dinner is about to begin. Dumbledore asked after welcoming Eisen into the office. Back to school dinner. Well, I almost forgot. I thought, I can come to you after the dinner. Eisen was taken aback, with a smile on his face. By the way, Professor Dumbledore, your injury should? Thank you for your concern. He's cured. Dumbledore winked at Eisen, then held out his right hand. I saw that the scorched black spots on it had completely disappeared. When Eisen came to the auditorium was already full of students. Thousands of candles hover over the dining table, illuminating everyone's faces. Hagrid, you had a great vacation. Also, congratulations. Eisen looked at Hagrid next to him. His messy hair and beard seemed to be tidied up a little. To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, change sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa Udo Android and Apple are all available. It's okay. Thank you, Professor Eisen. Hagrid raised a glass of wine and gestured towards Eisen. Judging by Hagrid's beaming face, he should be pleased with his new position as Hogwarts Professor of Care of Magical Creatures. After the basilisk in the Slytherin chamber was solved, Hagrid's life finally ushered in a turning point. 50 years ago, Hagrid killed Moaning Myrtle because he was suspected of having ordered the monster to kill him. At that time, he was not only expelled from Hogwarts, but also had his wand broken. If it wasn't for Dumbledore's protection, he would even be in Azkaban. Well, now that Hagrid had been proven innocent, he could use his wand in the light of day. However, Eisen felt that Dumbledore's consideration was a bit inappropriate for Hagrid to be the Professor of Protection of Magical Creatures. It's not that Hagrid isn't competent enough to be a Professor of Protection of Magical Creatures, but he's somehow oblivious to how little wizards react to magical creatures he thinks are cute, but are actually fierce. The thought turned, and Eisen didn't think much about it. After smiling at Hagrid, the god's perspective opened, and he saw two Dementors standing guard on both sides of the gate of Hogwarts. It can be seen that in order to deal with Sirius Black, who escaped from Azkaban, the Ministry of Magic has made arrangements at Hogwarts. Turning his gaze again, Eisen saw the trio in Professor McGonagall's office, where Madame Pomfrey was also there. When the sorting ceremony was over, the trio and Professor McGonagall walked into the auditorium one after the other. Professor Flitwick picked up the sorting hat and the three-legged stool and walked out of the auditorium. Professor McGonagall stepped forward and sat on the empty seat of the faculty. The trio made their way to an empty seat at a Gryffindor house table. It has to be said that the savior is so eye-catching every time. So when the trio walked along the back of the auditorium, almost everyone was pointing at him. On the one hand, it was because Harry Potter's savior was famous enough. On the other hand, it was because the news that he fainted just now was spread. Dumbledore stood up, and the gesture made all the students fall silent. Welcome. Dumbledore's long beard glistened in the light of the candles, and his blue eyes gleamed with wisdom through semicircular glasses. Welcome everyone to Hogwarts in the new school year. I have a few words to say to you, one of which is very important. Before you get lost in the food in front of you, let it be clear. After searching the Hogwarts Express, as you must know, there are a number of Dementors who were sent here by the Ministry of Magic from Azkaban on official business. Looking at the way Dumbledore spoke, Eisen could clearly feel that Dumbledore was actually unwilling to let Dementors enter Hogwarts. But there is no way. The reason why the Ministry of Magic did this is very legitimate. It is to prevent Sirius Black from entering the school and posing a threat to the students. Therefore, Dumbledore could only accept such an arrangement. They are stationed at all entrances to the school grounds, and during their stay here, I must make it clear that no one is allowed to leave the school without permission. Dumbledore looked very solemn, and then glanced at Harry. Dementors are not fooled by disguises, not even an invisibility cloak. Hearing what Dumbledore said, Eisen couldn't help feeling a little emotional. The invisibility cloak, one of the Deathly Hallows, is so famous that it is said to be able to avoid the search of the God of Death. In reality, however, Dumbledore could see through Harry in the invisibility cloak. Of course, it's fine if Dumbledore can see through it. After all, as the most powerful wizard of the contemporary era, Dumbledore can be justified by being special. But why can Moody's magic eye see through the disguise of the invisibility cloak? Also, the Dementors, Filch's cat, and Hagrid's dog don't seem to be fooled by the invisibility cloak. Of course, what makes Eisen feel the most outrageous is that it seems that Harry has an indelible black history when he put on the invisibility cloak. That is, he was directly cast by Della's magic spell. I don't know if this kind of thing will happen after the plot of this world has changed so much. Dementors don't understand excuses or requests by nature, so I warn each of you not to give them excuses to hurt you. Dumbledore paused, then continued, I hope prefects, and the newly appointed presidents of the Boys and Girls Students' Councils, you must ensure that no student will have a conflict with a Dementor. The trio of saviors are in the 3rd grade, so the student union presidents for this year are Percy and Penello respectively. Speaking of which, Harry's parents also served as presidents of the male and female student unions at Hogwarts. Percy and Penello are a natural pair no matter how you look at it, but unfortunately, the two did not come together after graduation. As for why they didn't get together, the original book didn't mention much. But from a few words, it can be speculated that it may be because Percy held the same attitude as the Ministry of Magic in the event of Voldemort's return, which Penelope didn't like. Happily, I am delighted to welcome 2 new teachers to our team this year. Dumbledore continued, the first is Professor Lupin, who will be the vacant defense against the dark arts professor at the school. Job. Lupin stood up smiling and nodding around, then sat down. Eisen noticed that the trio clapped hard. The trio, it seems, were impressed by the scene where Lupin used the Patronus charm to drive away the Dementors. However, the other students were not so enthusiastic and just gave some scattered applause. After all, of all the professors, Lupin did look a little shabby in his attire. Regardless of the attitude of the students towards the professor, Eisen could see clearly that Snape was staring at Lupin with a distorted expression. If you only knew the superficial information, you would think that Snape's behavior was only because Lupin took the position of Professor of Defense against the dark arts that Snape wanted to apply for. But in fact, the two had feuded since they were students. After all, Lupin was with Harry's father James when they were students. So, Snape didn't want to see Lupin and had nothing to say. It is with great regret that I have to inform you that our Professor of the Protection of Magical Creatures, Professor Kettleburn, retired at the end of last year. Dumbledore continued after the less enthusiastic applause for Lupin died down. However, I'm pleased to report that the second newly appointed professor is none other than Rubeus Hagrid. He has agreed to serve as a teacher in addition to being a gamekeeper. After Hagrid stood up, the tall figure was full of oppression. Seeing his flushed face, he seemed extremely excited. Below, at Gryffindor's table, the applause was exceptionally loud. Eisen also took the opportunity to applaud Hagrid's appointment. Okay, I think the important things have been said. Let's start eating. Dumbledore took his seat after finishing speaking. In an instant, a lot of food appeared on the plate on the table out of thin air, and the goblet was also filled with drinks. For a while, the entire auditorium was filled with the sound of laughter and the clashing of knives and forks. When the food on the plates disappeared, Dumbledore told all the students to go to rest. Apparently, this marks the end of the new year's opening dinner. When the prefects of each year took the newly enrolled wizards back to their respective common rooms, Eisen followed Dumbledore all the way to the principal's office. Chapter 2, Astral Projection? The new school year has just begun, but the whole of Hogwarts is already buzzing. In the corridor and aisle, the whispering voices of the little wizards continued to enter Eisen's ears. Compared with the empty castle before, this kind of popularity is more joyful. A few minutes later, Eisen and Dumbledore arrived in the headmaster's office together. Okay, Professor Eisen, did you come to see me for something? Sitting behind the desk, Dumbledore showed a little curiosity on his face. Yes, there is indeed something that needs to be said. Eisen sat on the chair next to him and looked at Dumbledore. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa do install the latest version. When Dumbledore heard Eisen's words, his face suddenly became strange. Professor Eisen, don't tell me, you found another Horcrux? Of course not. I don't have such a great relationship with Horcruxes. Eisen couldn't help but rolled his eyes, and Dumbledore thought he could find all Horcruxes, right? So, what are you going to say? Dumbledore paused slightly. Before, we discussed creating a new magic to expel Voldemort's soul fragments from Harry. Eisen's face became serious. I don't know. How far is the progress? It's very difficult. I don't have any clue yet. I have to say that the Horcrux is indeed a remarkable invention. Dumbledore's face also became serious. So, is there no way to collect the soul fragments from the Horcrux? Eisen felt a little outrageous. Since magic is so idealistic, this method should be able to be researched. Repent. Dumbledore's eyes narrowed. Confession? Eisen repeated, with a thoughtful look in his eyes. That's right. Making a Horcrux is a very evil black magic. It needs to split your own soul to make it. But if you really feel what you have done and can sincerely repent, you can make your soul whole again, said Dumbledore, nodding. But obviously, it is impossible for Voldemort to have the idea of repentance. Eisen said in a flat tone, but couldn't help complaining in his heart. If Voldemort could repent, the sun would not rise from the west. Yes, then, with that said, Dumbledore looked at Eisen, as if asking what it was. Professor Dumbledore, I think you can take a look at this. Eisen looked down, took out a comic book from the storage ring, opened it to a certain page, and handed it to Dumbledore. This is... Dumbledore took it with curiosity on his face. The comics in the Muggle world, I think some of the ideas in them are quite interesting. After pointing, Eisen sat down on the chair again. Dumbledore carefully looked at the contents of the page that Eisen turned to in the manga, and Eisen sat quietly beside him without disturbing. For a while, the office fell silent. After a few minutes, Dumbledore looked up at Eisen meaningfully and said, Astral projection? Yes, a kind of magic conceived by Muggles. Astral projection can make people's souls go out of their bodies. Maybe you can consider this aspect and develop a new magic spell. Eisen said his thoughts calmly. This is a new idea, maybe you can try it. Dumbledore nodded slowly after pondering for a while. Eisen nodded calmly and didn't speak, as if he was thinking about something. After a moment, Eisen looked at Dumbledore, hesitated for a moment, but said it anyway. Do you think a clemency is useful? You mean, Dumbledore frowned. Voldemort's soul fragments have been splashed on Harry for more than 10 years, and the connection between Harry and Voldemort will become closer and closer. So, will there be a day when Harry's mind is affected and occupied by Voldemort's soul fragments? Eisen paused at this point, believing that Dumbledore understood what he meant. Harry and Tom are different. He chose Gryffindor, has a lot of real friends, Dumbledore said, but then changed his tone. But, you're right, that connection did make Harry insecure. So you plan to teach him a clemency? Harry had been having nightmares for a while, and I taught him a clemency, but I don't know if he has learned it. Eisen explained briefly. You're right, Harry does need a clemency to cut off contact with Tom. Dumbledore reached out and handed the comic book back to Eisen. In 2 years, although Eisen has made slow progress in a clemency, he has successfully mastered it. It's just that Eisen is temporarily unable to achieve the level of fabricating memories in his mind. However, when thinking of a clemency, Eisen thought of legilimency as opposed to a clemency. Obviously, in the world of wizards, legilimency is also a magical skill. This ability is not just mind reading. It can also interpret other people's memories and emotions, and even modify other people's memories to some extent. From this point of view, there may be some similarities between legilimency and the forgetting curse. However, what Eisen was sure of was that legilimency was useless to him, because legilimency is not something that can directly read other people's memories out of thin air. This also requires an action, which is to invade other people's brains, and then the action of reading memories and emotions can be completed. As for the current Eisen, not to mention that he has learned occlumency, but the huge magic power in his body is enough to resist the foreign magic power that invades him. So, do you have anything else to do? Seeing that Eisen hadn't spoken, Dumbledore continued to ask. Oh, no more. Eisen stood up and was about to leave. However, when turning around, an idea suddenly popped up in Eisen's mind. So he stopped and turned to look at Dumbledore. By the way, Professor Dumbledore, I have a question to ask. What? Dumbledore looked at Eisen suspiciously. Flying curse. Does this spell have a distance limit? Eisen looked curious. I mean, super long-distance object summoning. For example, cross-country summoning, cross-continental summoning, or even cross-planet summoning. After hearing Eisen's question, the corner of Dumbledore's mouth twitched faintly, and then looked at Eisen strangely. Have you tried it? Dumbledore asked after a moment of silence. No, that's why I asked you, the most powerful wizard of our time. Eisen shook his head. The object to be summoned by the flying charm, the farther away it is, the more difficult it is to summon. But as long as you really concentrate, the summoned thing will fly over. So, Dumbledore explained, with a deep meaning look at Eisen. So in theory, interplanetary summoning is possible. Right. Eisen showed a clear look on his face. Yeah, so what do you need to summon? Dumbledore wondered what Eisen was thinking. I think, since there is a high probability that Voldemort made Horcruxes for Hufflepuff's gold cup and Slytherin's locket, why not try the flying curse? Eisen said seriously. That's not a good idea. Dumbledore shook his head. The flying curse can be broken by the intercepting curse. If Tom really made Hufflepuff's gold cup and Slytherin's locket into Horcruxes, I believe he will casting spells to intercept the possibility of being summoned by the flying curse. After leaving Dumbledore's office, Eisen was still thinking about the flying charm. The flying curse Eisen has been practicing for a long time, and it is not an exaggeration to describe it as freewheeling. When casting this spell to summon an item, you must concentrate on imagining the item in your mind. That is to say, it is impossible to call something directly based on a name alone. In other words, if Eisen wanted to summon the sun, he would have to physically visualize the sun in his mind. To summon the moon, you have to imagine what the moon looks like in your mind. As for, it is basically impossible for Eisen to summon a meteorite to fall by shouting meteorite is coming. Maybe, after Eisen's magic level breaks through the sky, he can do it, but it's definitely not possible right now. Chapter 3. The Problem with the Fidelity Curse. Early the next morning, when Eisen came to the auditorium for dinner, he found that the entire auditorium was very lively. Many people are discussing the Dementors in the school, and many people are discussing Sirius Black who escaped from Azkaban. But more people are talking about the savior Harry Potter. Especially Delabranche, when telling stories to other students in Slytherin College, also pretended to be in a coma to allude to Harry's embarrassment when he fainted. However, quite a few of Hufflepuff's little wizards were impressed by the disarming spell Harry had cast before fainting. I was on the other side of the aisle at the time. You didn't see? Harry was fighting the Dementors. The overwhelming red light almost blinded my eyes. Yes, it's unbelievable that Harry's disarming curse is so powerful. That's not surprising. I mean, Harry defeated you-know-who as a baby, found the Chamber of Secrets entrance last year, and confronted the basilisk with the professors. Now you see, his power against Dementors is its normal. Listening to the conversation of the little wizards, the corner of Eisen's mouth twitched slightly, resisting the urge to laugh out loud. After eating the Cornish pie in 2 or 3 bites and drinking some orange juice, he came directly outside the castle. In the new semester, Hogwarts is full of vitality, but unfortunately, the Dementors guarding the entrances are particularly disgusting. Eisen sat on the stone steps extending to the edge of the lawn without any scruples, his thoughts gradually diverging. The book-chasing app recommended to me by an old book friend who has known me for 10 years, yet we're reading. It's really easy to use. I rely on reading and listening to books to pass the time while driving and before going to bed. You can download Yegwoyudu here. Speaking of which, from the beginning to the end of the new school year, Voldemort had no role at all. What happened this school year basically revolved around the prison escaped Sirius Black and Pettigrew Peter. After Sirius Black escaped from prison, everyone in the Ministry of Magic thought that his target would be Harry Potter who was studying at Hogwarts. Therefore, after Harry cast a spell to inflate his aunt during the summer vacation, not only was he not punished, but he was personally arranged by the Minister of Magic Fudge in the Leaky Cauldron. Harry lived comfortably in the Leaky Cauldron for a full month. After that, when he went to King's Cross, he was escorted by 2 cars from the Ministry of Magic. It can be seen that the purpose of the Ministry of Magic is to protect Harry and prevent him from being harmed by Sirius Black. But Eisen knew that the reason why Sirius escaped from prison was not because he was going to Hogwarts to attack Harry, but because he saw a photo of Wesley's family traveling in Egypt in the Daily Prophet. In the photo, Scabbers, lying on Ron's shoulder, caught his attention. Others may not know Banban's true identity, but Sirius Black knows it all. Of course. The reason for all this began when Harry's parents were killed by Voldemort more than 10 years ago. Harry's father, James, is good friends with Sirius Black and Pettigrew Peter. Sirius Black is Harry's godfather. In order to avoid Voldemort, James and Lily used the loyalty charm in the house they lived in Godric's Valley and made the little blue star Black as their secret keeper. As a result, Sirius Black let Voldemort know that he was the secret keeper for fear of being leaked. So after discussing with James, he changed the identity of the secret keeper to Peter Pettigrew. However, this kind of behavior is too deadly. Peter Pettigrew turned around and sold their news to Voldemort. What happened next was a matter of course. Voldemort killed Harry's parents. Afterwards, everyone thought it was Sirius Black who leaked the secret to Voldemort. But only he knows that Peter Pettigrew is the culprit. For this reason, he frantically hunted down Peter Pettigrew, but was unfortunately escaped by Peter Pettigrew. Pettigrew Peter blew up a street when he escaped, and at the same time cut off one of his own fingers, creating the illusion that he was attacked and killed by Sirius. Then, use Animagus to transform into a mouse named Scabbers, who has been living in Ron's house. As for Sirius Black, he became the biggest blame man, and he was directly imprisoned in Azkaban without even a trial, and the imprisonment lasted for 12 years. Originally, the disheartened Sirius Black was already in despair, but I didn't expect to see Peter Pettigrew suddenly in the newspaper. This time, Sirius Black regained his fighting spirit and escaped directly from Azkaban. Because for him, if Peter Pettigrew can be caught, then all the charges on him can be cleared. If it follows the original plot, it is a pity that Sirius Black not only failed to catch Peter Pettigrew, but even he himself had to hide outside. Of course, none of this is a big deal to Eisen. However, Eisen is still very curious about the Fidelity Curse. It is said that the Fidelity Charm is a very complex charm that can hide something or information about something deep in the Secret Keeper's soul, unless the Secret Keeper voluntarily speaks or writes those hidden secrets. This means that other people cannot steal the secret content from the Secret Keeper by using legilimency, imperious curse, and other methods. Of course, although the Fidelity Charm is magical, Eisen obviously can't use it. However, what made him feel strange was that since the Fidelity Curse required a Secret Keeper, why didn't Harry's parents be his Secret Keeper? If it is said that the setting of the Scarlet Loyalty Curse is that one cannot become a Secret Keeper by himself, that would be pure nonsense. You know, Bill Weiss later became the Secret Keeper of Shell Cottage. Or even if they really can't be the Secret Keeper themselves, then James and Lily can also be the other Secret Keeper. After becoming their respective Secret Keepers, wouldn't they live together in a secret home? Would they be very safe forever? Obviously, this is a logically unreasonable loophole. However, to be honest, if this loophole is closed and James and Lily can really become Secret Keepers, then the world of Harry Potter may not be able to unfold at all. Professor Eisen, what are you doing here? Hagrid's voice interrupted Eisen's thoughts. Eisen stood up and gave himself a cleanse, then looked at Hagrid who was coming. Hagrid, in his moleskin coat, was all smiles and seemed to be in a good mood. Nothing. What are you going to do? Eisen said flatly, pointing to the dead polecat that Hagrid was still clutching. My first class is about to start, right after lunch, so I'm going to do some preparations. Mentioning the class, Hagrid immediately gave off a radiant look. Hagrid, is your first class going to introduce magical creatures to the students? Thinking of what would happen next, Eisen felt the need to remind Hagrid. That's right, Buckbeak is a very gentle guy. He will definitely be welcomed. Hagrid smiled all over his face, with anticipation in his eyes. Hagrid, I have to warn you. Eisen hesitated for a moment, and then said, you're good at dealing with magical creatures, but those students are not as good as you. I mean, you have to watch those students. Don't let them get into trouble. Don't worry, Professor Eisen. I'll be ready. Hagrid confidently patted his chest with one hand. By the way, how does the puppy I gave you look like? Eisen nodded, looking at Hagrid with interest, as if thinking of something, and asked, oh, that little guy is very cute, just a bit naughty. Hagrid raised his eyebrows and then thanked Eisen. But I like it very much, thank you, Professor Eisen. Waving his hand, Eisen didn't say anything. After parting from Hagrid, it was already 9 o'clock. At this time, the first class of the new school year is basically about to start. Eisen didn't pay much attention to this. After entering the castle and coming to his office, Eisen disappeared in a flash and came to his secret base. Chapter 4A Series of Unlucky Events. For the secret base excavated in the Antarctic Glacier, Eisen has opened up 3 rooms in it. In addition to the alchemy laboratory at the beginning, there is a small bedroom and a cubicle. The small bedroom is just a preparation, and Eisen has no plans to live here for a long time. The compartment is a room specially opened for the study of Dementors. Due to the traceless stretching spell, the space of the entire secret base is spacious enough. As for whether to open up space for other purposes, Eisen will discuss it if necessary in the future. After Eisen's figure appeared out of nowhere in the compartment, he turned his attention to the crystal ball holding the Dementor. It can be seen that the runes above the crystal ball are constantly absorbing the energy transformed from the surroundings and pouring it into the crystal ball below. In the crystal ball, the Dementor kept rolling, but was trapped by chains around it and couldn't escape no matter what. After the energy poured into it was absorbed by the silver chains, the blooming silver luster became even brighter. On the opposite side, in another crystal ball, a little bit of gray luster has already appeared. The sheen is so subtle that it's almost invisible if you don't look carefully. Seeing all of this, Eisen showed a satisfied smile on his face, and then flashed to the alchemy laboratory next door. On the long transparent table a foot away from the ice wall, there was an ordinary wizard's robe laid flat on it. The reason why the wizard's robe is laid here is because Eisen wants to enchant it and make it into a magic-proof hat-like prop. There is a transparent cabinet next to the table, in which are the basilisk eyes and basilisk fangs that Eisen got earlier. Sitting on the chair behind the long table, Eisen picked up the wizard's robe on the table and put it aside. In fact, it is very simple for Eisen to make props similar to the anti-spell hat. If you think about it carefully, you will know that the effect of the anti-curse hat is actually similar to the iron armor curse to a certain extent. Therefore, Eisen is sure to replicate props similar to the anti-spell hat. However, the anti-spell hat can only reflect some weak spells and jinxes. Eisen was not satisfied with this effect, so he wanted to continue his research in alchemy in pursuit of refining more powerful magic items. After taking out Quest for Ancient Alchemy, Eisen immersed himself in the ocean of knowledge. Due to Eisen's super physical fitness and magic, he couldn't feel the cold around him at all. Time passed slowly, and when Eisen returned to Hogwarts again, it was already evening. When he came to the auditorium to eat, he heard two pieces of gossip that caused a lot of trouble. The first thing happened in the divination class in the North Tower. I don't know if Hogwarts was affected by Dementors. In the divination class, the little wizards were frightened by Trelawney's divination, because Trelawney predicted bad things about almost every little wizard. For example, Neville Longbottom, Trelawney mentioned his grandma in divination class, causing Neville to be frightened, for fear that something might happen to his grandma. And Parvati Patil was also intimidated by Trelawney, asking her to beware of red-haired men. Such a prophecy made Parvati have to keep a considerable distance from Ron. Not only that, but Trelawney also made other predictions, for example, that in February, a vicious flu would hit Hogwarts and shut down classes. Around Easter, one person left us forever. Combined with her so-called ominous prophecy to Harry later, it seems to indicate that Harry Potter, the savior, will be killed by ominous circumstances around Easter. In addition to what happened in the divination class, there was another incident that caused a lot of waves, and that was the first class Hagrid had, and there was an accident. Even though Eisen had already warned Hagrid, the accident still happened. Of course, Eisen actually knew what was going on. Under Hagrid's guidance, Harry not only stroked the hippogriff Buckbeak, but also flew around the sky on his body. As a result, Della wanted to go up and ride Buckbeak even if he was alive. However, he didn't follow Hagrid's instructions and was injured by Buckbeak. Things happened one after another, and a depressive atmosphere quickly spread in the castle. Harry, don't worry, didn't Professor McGonagall say that? Divination is one of the most inaccurate subjects in magic. Hermione seemed completely unaffected and comforted Harry very calmly. However, Professor Eisen once said it in the first grade. He said that Professor Trelawney is the kind of person who has a talent for predicting the future through divination. Harry retorted muffled. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa You Do install the latest version. Although in the Transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall did say that Professor Trelawney predicted the death of a student every year. It never happened, but Harry couldn't be happier when he thought that he really saw the big black dog that Trelawney predicted. However, Professor Eisen also said that Trelawney can predict the future to a certain extent. Not completely predicting the future. Hermione said indifferently. Don't worry, Harry. That big black dog might just be a coincidence. You see, the Dementors are still guarding the entrance of Hogwarts, and Sirius Black can't get in. This was Ron's consolation. For a while, the three fell silent. Did you see Hagrid? It's too bad that something like that happened to him in his first class, Hermione said suddenly, mentioning Hagrid with a worried look on her face. Hagrid wasn't in the auditorium. Ron shook his head, and then the look of disgust appeared on his face again. Malfoy always messes things up. He won't be fired. Harry's attention was also on Hagrid, and his tone was full of worry as he spoke. Of course not. We all know that Malfoy is entirely to blame for this. Ron couldn't help but grow louder. He looked at Harry and said, Hagrid said that when a monster is insulted, it will attack. Malfoy didn't listen, so it's his own fault for being attacked. After dinner, the three returned to the Gryffindor common room, where Professor McGonagall assigned a lot of homework. There's a light in Hagrid's window. Harry looked out the window and found that Hagrid's cabin was still lit. If we hurry up, we can go downstairs and see him. It's still early. You guys go. I'm going to visit Professor Eisen. Hermione looked at the homework silently, then spoke slowly. What are you going to do with Professor Eisen? Ron asked, puzzled after throwing down his homework. Practical training for the dueling team. I mean, do you still have time to go? Hermione froze for a moment before asking back. Harry and Ron froze for a moment, looking at the homework at the same time, and then showed hesitation. Hermione, don't you have time to? Those homeworks should be easy for you. Harry looked at Hermione. But I have a few more classes than you guys. Hermione reached out and patted the thick stack of homework. Then what do you mean, go to Professor Eisen and say to postpone the daily actual combat training, or to reduce the number of actual combat training? It was a matter of his own strength, so Harry had to ask further. What do you think? Hermione wanted to see what the two of them thought. I think it's better to take part in the actual combat training of the dueling team once a week, which is too much homework, Ron said, blushing, and then pointed directly at Harry. Harry has to participate in Quidditch training every day, plus the family homework, not even a little free time. Harry couldn't help but nodded at the thought of having more free time. Then I'll go talk to Professor Eisen, Hermione said, but sighed slightly. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, shrugged their shoulders, and headed outside in the direction of Hagrid's hut. And Hermione came to Eisen's office alone. Chapter 5 Legendary Time Travel Features. In the office, Eisen was concentrating on practicing the spell. Instead of casting another spell, Eisen stretched out his arm, focusing on his fingers. With the rotation of Eisen's thoughts, his fingers gradually changed. Visible to the naked eye, Eisen's finger transformed into a metal rod, which later transformed into a wooden rod. Immediately afterwards, Eisen turned into a wooden stake, and then into a stone pillar. A few minutes later, Eisen's figure reappeared. Obviously, the way of using this kind of transfiguration is not difficult for Eisen. Although Eisen has not tried this kind of deformation before, it really does not feel any pressure for him at present. Immediately afterwards, Eisen shook his fingers, and a faint light emerged from his fingers. A few seconds later, Eisen's entire arm had turned into light. When Eisen's arm returned to flesh and blood, his forehead was already dripping with sweat. Previously, whether an object changed into another object, or an element changed into another element for Eisen, it was something that could be done naturally after the progress of transfiguration. At this time, the deformation of the human body directly changes into an object, which is also within Eisen's expectation. After all, Slughorn can do this kind of thing. But the attempt to directly transform the human body into elements put Eisen under a lot of pressure. Fortunately, despite initial attempts at this transformation, Eisen succeeded. Next, as long as you practice without interruption, then Eisen will naturally be able to master the skills of directly deforming elements of the human body. As for why Eisen is studying the human body's art of morphing between the elements, because Eisen felt that this should be a manifestation of the deeper nature of transfiguration. Think about it. If you can freely change into any element, incarnation of thunder and lightning, incarnation of breeze, incarnation of light, doesn't it mean that you can incarnate into everything? At first glance, this ability seems to be used to pretend for Eisen. But in fact, Eisen has a hunch that this profound change is very important to him. Dong dong dong. Come in. The knock on the door interrupted Eisen's thoughts, and Eisen's vision changed, and he found that the person standing outside was Hermione. What's the matter? Looking at Hermione, who opened the door and came in, Eisen showed admiration in his eyes. Yes, Professor Eisen. Hermione looked at the smiling Eisen, blushed slightly, and nodded quickly. Sit down and talk. Eisen gestured for Hermione to sit on the chair next to him. Professor Eisen, what I want to say is, can we reduce the number of actual combat training from 8:30 to 9 p.m. and change it to once a week? As she said this, it seemed that she felt that she had failed Eisen's expectations. A touch of blushing color. Oh. Eisen's eyes flashed, and then he showed some surprise. Isn't there enough time? Show me your class schedule. Thinking about the addition of several elective courses for the third-year students, the frequency of actual combat training every night is indeed higher. Moreover, Eisen also knew that Hermione took all the electives directly, so it was normal that there was not enough time. Yes, take a look, Professor. Hermione hesitated a little, but still handed a schedule to Eisen. After taking Hermione's class schedule, Eisen showed a look of, as expected, on his face. I saw that on the first day of class, 10 courses were arranged in just one day. As for the first class at 9 o'clock, there are 3 full courses that conflict in terms of time. They are divination at 9 o'clock, arithmetic and divination at 9 o'clock, and Muggle studies at 9 o'clock. 10 classes a day is really not enough time. Eisen pondered for a moment, looked at the way Hermione's head twitched, and Eisen continued, however, 3 classes at the same time at 9 o'clock? I've already discussed it with Professor McGonagall. Hermione didn't seem to know what to say to Eisen. She was so anxious that she was about to cry, and her face was full of tangled words. Time turner? Right. Eisen smiled directly, not letting Hermione struggle any further. Ah, Professor Eisen, Do you know about time turners? Hermione's expression faded, and she looked at Eisen in surprise. That's right, for Hogwarts courses, if you choose all the courses, then there will be conflicts in the time of some courses. At this time, you need a time converter to help, Eisen said with a changed tone. Maybe you've heard some news. Bill Weiss and Percy Weiss, both of them have 12 OWL certificates. To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, change sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa Udo Android and Apple are all available. You mean they use the time turner too? The surprise on Hermione's face intensified. I can't figure out how they did it other than this. Eisen's tone was rather flat. By the way, time turner, can you take it out and let me have a look? Oh, Hermione blushed again, and then reached out to grope for the neckline. A little whiteness flashed past. A slender golden chain was pulled out by Hermione. After the gold chain was completely pulled out, a small and exquisite golden hourglass timer hung down, with a faint light emitting from it from time to time. It seems that it gives people a mysterious feeling. Fantastic creation, isn't it? Eisen stared at the time turner in Hermione's hand and sighed in amazement. The moment Hermione handed it over, Goldfinger responded instantly. Is it possible to consume a miraculous feature to reenact the discovery of the extraordinary feature, the legendary time travel feature? Yes. After successfully engraving this time travel feature, Eisen couldn't help but smile on his face. After that, Eisen didn't stop, but directly integrated this time travel feature. After the fusion, a grand, long-lasting power fused and lingered in Eisen's body, as if directly penetrating the soul and body, faintly connecting with the previously fused immortality. A different feeling emerged in Eisen's mind, and when he wanted to ponder it carefully, the power in his body became silent again. With a thought, a character panel appeared in front of Eisen's eyes. Character: Eisen Turner. Extraordinary talent. Magic. Activated. Magic value: 11,560. Add 10 points of magic every day. Extraordinary characteristics: excellent level spellcasting characteristics, combination degree 115. Already fused. Legendary level immortality characteristics, already fused. Perfect level observation characteristics, already fused. Legendary level time travel characteristics, fused. Miracle feature: 0 copies. 1 copy is automatically obtained every year. With a thought, the character panel in front of Eisen disappeared, and then quietly returned the time turner to Hermione. In just a few seconds, no one knew that Eisen had secretly integrated a legendary time travel feature. The time turner is said to be sealed and made with a spell called the Hour Reversal Curse, which is quite unstable to use. After a flash of joy on his face, Eisen began to preach solemnly, even if it is a time turner, the time for time travel cannot exceed 5 hours. You must remember this. I know, Professor McGonagall told me. Maybe it was because of Eisen's advice. Hermione's face revealed a look of joy. Then, she hung the gold chain around her neck and tucked the time turner back into her neckline. By the way, you used the time turner today. Can you tell me how it felt at that time? Eisen was very curious about this. After Hermione put the time turner away, seeing Eisen's expression, she thought for a while, and slowly described her feelings at that time. When using the time turner, I felt like I was flying backwards quickly. All kinds of clouds will flash by, and some noises will be heard in my ears, but in fact I didn't fly. I still stood where I am. You think the scene is moving? Eisen thought about it. That's right. That is to say, where you stand and use the time converter, after time goes backwards, you will still stand there. That's it. Eisen nodded, and the office became quiet for a moment. Chapter 6: Ways to Travel Through Time and Bugs? Okay, since there is not enough time in the 3rd grade, the actual combat training of the dueling team can be changed to once a week, on Saturday nights. What do you think? After a moment of silence, Eisen returned to this topic. I think it's okay. I'll talk to Harry and Ron. Hermione's expression was slightly restrained, and her tone revealed a little relief. Well, if you have any problems at other times, you can also come to me. Eisen nodded with satisfaction. Is there anything else? If not, go back and rest. Thank you, Professor Eisen. Then I'll go first. Hermione stood up from the chair, waved her hand, and left happily. After Hermione left, the smile appeared on the corner of Eisen's mouth again. The power of time is silent in his body, but Eisen can feel that as long as he moves his mind, he can move this power in his body. To be able to integrate the characteristics of time travel in the body is definitely a very meaningful thing for Eisen, because this means that Eisen has been able to travel in the time dimension since then. Previously, after learning about the Hour Reversal Curse and the time converter, Eisen already knew that time travel in this world is extremely unstable. However, after the legendary time travel characteristic was integrated into his body, Eisen has already experienced the extraordinary power of this kind of power. Unlike using the time converter directly, if Eisen spontaneously travels through time, the power that has been integrated in the body will be more stable than Eisen imagined. In other words, if Eisen takes the initiative to travel through time, he should not experience sequelae such as rapid aging after the time travel ends like other people. However, feeling the power in his body, Eisen felt that it was not so perfect. Perhaps it was because it was a feature extracted from the time converter. So when Eisen sent out the idea of traveling to the future in his mind, the power in his body did not respond at all. So even with the feature of time travel, you can only go back to the past, not the future, Eisen said involuntarily, his face full of emotion. Then, if we travel back in time? Thoughts turned in Eisen's mind, and he came to a deserted wilderness. The uninhabited wilderness, coupled with the cover of night, made Eisen seem invisible. It had only rained yesterday, and the smell of green grass mixed with soil circulated in Eisen's nose, which made him feel much happier. After putting the illusion charm on himself, Eisen used his thoughts to activate the characteristic power of time travel in his body. Back to a year ago? As soon as this idea appeared, Eisen had the urge to step into another dimension. Eisen immediately dispelled this thought, and only then did the strength in his body calm down. So, how about going back to 10 years ago? Feeling the power in the body carefully, under the movement of the mind, Eisen can also feel that the characteristic of time travel can take effect. Immediately afterwards, Eisen tried the mind test of going back in time. It is found that whether it is 100,000 years or 10,000 years, it seems to be able to work. However, the pressure on Eisen seems to increase over time. And the longer time travel attempts such as 100,000 years, millions of years, etc., made the time travel feature in Eisen's body directly unresponsive. What's the reason? Eisen pondered. Eisen knows something from memory about how the time turner works. But the way it is expressed in the original book is a little different. For example, the way Hermione uses the time turner is to go back a few hours to take another class. This way of traveling shows that Hermione stayed in the past after going back to the time point where she turned the time turner. Recommended, Yegwa reading and chasing books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa here, everyone can try it soon. And the witch who was trapped in 1402 for 5 days in an experiment in 1899 is more like another way to travel through time. Although she was trapped in 1402 for 5 days, she finally managed to return to 1899 instead of staying in 1402 directly and living until 1899. Although this was a failed experiment, she was able to return to the time point before the time travel, which means that people who have gone back to the past using the time converter can directly return to the present. In this way, the time travel characteristic that has been integrated in Eisen, if the time travel is activated. There also seem to be two options for time travel. Take the point in time before the millennium as an example. Suppose Eisen travels back 1,000 years. Then, Eisen can choose to stay for a few hours and return directly to the present. This method is apparently the method usually used in the experiments of the Department of Mysteries. In another way, Eisen cannot choose to return to the present, but directly lived 1,000 years ago and has lived until now. The sequelae of this method are clearly reflected in the witch who was trapped for 5 days. The aging speed will be very fast. It was just trapped for 5 days, and after returning, it would directly age for 5 centuries. So if you have been living in the past, I am afraid that the speed of aging will be accelerated. But this is not a problem for Eisen, because Eisen is already immortal. Therefore, if you choose this method, as long as Eisen can ensure that he is concealed enough to not be discovered by others, there should be no problem. However, longer time travel is not possible. Perhaps there should be some other conditions that have not been met. Thinking of this, Eisen shook his head, and then made a flashback to Hogwarts. Time travel is something that cannot be taken too seriously. So, Eisen didn't go straight to time travel recklessly. However, sitting in the office, while his thoughts were racing, Eisen thought of some problems with using the time converter, or some bugs in it. It was the same witch who traveled back to 1402 and was trapped for 5 days. The time converter, this thing is clearly set, the golden hourglass timer. If you turn it around, the time will go back 1 hour. So how many hours did the witch go back from 1899 to 1402? Eisen calculated that the shortest period between these 2 years is 181,162 days, or 4,347,888 hours. This means that if the witch wants to go back to 1402 from 1899, she needs to turn the time converter at least 4.3 million times. But this is too outrageous. You must know that even if it turns 1 circle per second, it will take 50 days of continuous turning without sleep to make enough circles. If someone were to use the time turner, they would have to turn their fingers useless. In this regard, Eisen thought about it for a long time and found out after thinking about it for a long time. Unless, you can cast magic on the time converter, so that the time converter will automatically rotate, and the rotation speed must be very fast, reaching hundreds or thousands of revolutions per second or even more. Otherwise, this bug cannot be explained. Thinking of this, Eisen couldn't help but rejoice. Fortunately, he directly reproduced the time travel feature stored in the time converter. In this case, if he wants to travel in time, he only needs to concentrate on turning his mind. However, there is one problem that Eisen can't confirm. That is, can he take people on time travel? It's strange to say, In the words of the time turner, there is a record in the original book. After Hermione put the gold chain of the time turner on Harry's head, the two of them went back to 3 hours together. If there are 3 people in the set, will the 3 of them travel together, or 4 or 5 people? In other words, if the gold chain is made longer, is it still effective to cover dozens of people directly? I have to say that once you think about some things deeply, you will find that there are problems everywhere. After a while, Eisen came back to his senses and restrained his divergent thoughts. Eisen felt that there was no need to worry about whether he could take people through time and space together, because even if he could really bring people back and forth, he would not do so easily. After all, one's abilities still need to be kept secret. Chapter 7, Abnormal, huh? Time came to Wednesday in a blink of an eye. In the astronomy class in the evening, Eisen introduced himself to some newly enrolled young wizards. Most of you already know me. Eisen's gaze flicked over some familiar faces, and he paused slightly. Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, etc. from Gryffindor, and Daphne, Brack, etc. from Slytherin. For the learning and cognition of astronomy, I think many people already know what it does. As a course that does not require the use of magic, I think everyone needs to arrange their study time reasonably. A Gryffindor girl raised her hand and looked at Eisen with an innocent look. Professor, if you don't need to use magic, it means it's useless, right? Eisen smiled slightly, without the slightest turmoil in his heart. Miss, what is your name? Ramita, said the girl, Ramita Vane. Eisen nodded calmly. Miss Vanny, I need to remind you that astronomy class can't teach you magic, but it is still useful. Otherwise, why would Hogwarts offer this astronomy class? Of course, where is the value of astronomy knowledge? I think you need to weigh it yourself. After 2 years of astronomy classes, Eisen has lost much interest. After all, Eisen didn't really love astronomy, so he came to Hogwarts to teach astronomy. So, after a few words, Eisen started the class. The content of the class has basically remained the same as before. In addition to basic knowledge, such as the names of the planets and their orbits, Eisen is already very familiar with how to teach students. The next evening, Eisen, who had been busy for almost a day, accidentally heard another piece of gossip while eating in the auditorium, which also involved Professor Snape. In other words, currently the best app for reading and listening to books, Yegwa Reading, Yegwa install the latest version. In the afternoon defense against the dark arts class, the new Professor Lupin did not teach the knowledge in the classroom, but came to a practical class. Practical lessons teach students how to fend off boggarts, magical creatures that can turn into a wizard's worst fear. Boggarts love dark, enclosed spaces and usually hide in closets, the void under the bed, and cupboards under the sink. Of course, it is not powerful in itself, and cannot cause substantial damage to wizards. However, it has a very powerful ability. As long as some wizards are weak or afraid of something, then when facing boggarts, it may be very miserable. Of course, boggarts also have some drawbacks. For example, if multiple people face it together, it will become muddy, and they don't know what it should look like to scare people. Also, the boggart-specific spell, Funny Funny, works well. Beyond that, Eisen thinks a clemency should work wonders for the boggart. While this is speculation, Eisen feels that hiding his thoughts should prevent the boggart from seeing his own inner self. In class, Neville, a student of Gryffindor, was terrified of Professor Snape. Fortunately, with the encouragement of Professor Lupin by his side, Neville successfully used the boggart expulsion spell, Funny Funny. As a result, the whole thing became comical. Not only did Professor Snape change into a woman's attire, but he even carried a red handbag in his hand. At that time, Eisen was sitting at the long table in Gryffindor, and the trio were discussing with great interest the homework about boggarts that Professor Lupin had left for them. 2 aisles away from Eisen, a little witch in Hufflepuff with 2 golden braids vividly reproduced the scene at that time. Longbottom stood in front, and Professor Snape came up aggressively. Although his target was Longbottom, everyone was worried. I was thinking, Professor Snape was going to reprimand Longbottom again. As a result, unexpectedly, Hannah Abbott blushed. Professor Lupin comforted Longbottom, and then he successfully recited the spell. As a result, Professor Snape, who was aggressive before, suddenly put on Grandma Neville's embroidered clothes, and not only wore a tall hat and a red handbag on her hand. As Hannah said that, the little wizards around her gave out admiration from time to time. That boy is cool, isn't he? Said a little wizard. Eisen turned his gaze back to Neville, and found that he was burying his head in self-concern, as if a little embarrassed. Tut tut. Eisen can guarantee that this gossip will spread throughout the school soon. I don't know how Snape will react when he finds out. However, since this incident was uploaded from Professor Lupin's class, then Snape, who was already at odds with Lupin, would probably hate him even more. Speaking of which, if Eisen remembers correctly, Peter, the Pettigrew in the 3rd part of the original book, has actually been captured. At the critical moment, Lupin failed to drink the Wolfsbane potion from Snape, which resulted in his transformation on the night of the full moon and was directly escaped by Peter Pettigrew. In fact, Eisen felt that Snape was a little too impulsive. He also didn't want to think about Dumbledore being able to have Lupin as defense against the dark arts professor at the beginning of the school year when Sirius Black was making a fuss. This showed that, to some extent, Dumbledore had a lot of trust in Lupin. But alas, the feud between Snape and Lupin was already too deep. Moreover, Snape thought it was too dangerous for Dumbledore to let Lupin, a werewolf, teach Harry and others. Therefore, conflicts between them are inevitable. After dinner, Eisen went to Hagrid's cabin. Even though he knew Hagrid wasn't going to be fired, Eisen felt the need to visit him after something like this happened. "Hagrid, are you okay?" After entering Hagrid's hut, Eisen found that Hagrid looked decadent. "I'm afraid this is a new record," Hagrid said with frustration in his tone. "I don't think Hogwarts has ever had a teacher who had an accident on the first day of class." "Professor Eisen, you are right. I should be optimistic about those people's students." Era, who has grown up, jumped into Hagrid's arms and kept biting his cuff. "It seems that it is extraordinarily escaped. I heard about it, and it's not your fault, is it?" Eisen comforted. "No, I was too aggressive," said Hagrid, his eyes turning red. "I messed up everything. Do you think I'm going to get fired? It's not a big deal, is it? The injured student, Draco Malfoy, is already healed." Eisen raised his eyebrows. "And, you should know, Keitel, the teacher of the protection of magical creatures class before you burn, he was on at least 62 detentions while he was on the faculty. And he still did it until he retired." "Thanks, Professor Eisen. I feel better." Hagrid seemed to regain his composure. "Wow, woof." A voice interrupted what Eisen was about to say, and the Era in Hagrid's arms yelled a few times before rushing out the door. "This is it." Eisen looked at Hagrid in a daze, and at the same time opened the god's perspective, and found that Era had left the hut and ran towards the east. "I don't know what's going on. These days, Luke is always very irritable, but he will come back by himself after a while." Hagrid's expression didn't change at all, and he seemed to have gotten used to it. "Luke." Eisen was slightly taken aback. "That's right, it's so cute. Isn't that a nice name?" A smile appeared on Hagrid's face. Yes, the name is really nice." Hearing that Hagrid said it was cute, Eisen couldn't help but smirk. Following Luke's gaze, Eisen saw it stop not far in front of the Whomping Willow. Judging by its posture, it seems to be provoking the Whomping Willow. After a few minutes, Luke stopped all movements and turned around and ran, returning to Hagrid's hut in a short while, and burrowing into Hagrid's arms again. "Look, it'll be fine after it comes back." Hagrid stretched out his big hand and stroked Luke's head a few times. Suddenly, Luke's tongue lolled out, showing a lifeless expression, which almost made Eisen laugh. Has it been so abnormal all this time? Eisen didn't know much about the behavior of an ordinary Era. Could it be that after Hagrid's feeding, this ordinary Era has inspired a special talent? But seeing the stupid and cute look of it sticking out its tongue and panting continuously, Eisen gave up this idea. Maybe it's influenced by those damn Dementors. "I hope Sirius Black is caught soon." Hagrid's face showed an indignant expression. Chapter 8. Eisen vs. Hermione, Part 1. Hearing what Hagrid said, Eisen showed a thoughtful look. If he remembered correctly, Hagrid and Sirius Black had crossed paths a long time ago. Moreover, the relationship between the two should be very good before. Recommended, Yegwa reading and chasing books is really easy to use. Download Yegwa here, everyone can try it soon. However, judging from Hagrid's gnashing of teeth attitude towards Sirius Black's scapegoat is serious enough. "You think Sirius Black is going to break into Hogwarts?" Eisen glanced at Hagrid calmly. "Everyone thinks so. The Ministry of Magic sent Azkaban's guardian Dementors to station at Hogwarts." Hagrid's face turned somber. Dumbledore doesn't want Dementors in Hogwarts, but he also had to compromise with the Ministry of Magic, because he also knew who Sirius Black was targeting. "Sirius Black is targeting Harry?" Eisen said slowly, seeming to guide the topic. "That's right, Sirius Black is a loyal servant of the you-know-who. 10 years ago, if he hadn't leaked the secret to the you-know-who, Harry wouldn't have become an orphan," Hagrid said, as if remembering something sad. His eyes were red, tears came out, and then choked up. "At that time, I comforted him. I was really stupid." Seeing Hagrid, who couldn't control his emotions and was crying, Eisen got a headache. How to say? Although Hagrid has Titan blood, he looks rough, but he is full of emotions. "I heard that Sirius Black was arrested as a murderer because he murdered Peter Pettigrew, and then he was imprisoned in Azkaban?" After a short silence, Eisen changed the subject. "That's right, but he escaped from Azkaban. I really can't imagine how this happened. You know, the guarding Dementors in Azkaban are not vegetarian." Hagrid wiped away his tears, and his face showed I don't understand the color. In fact, Eisen also felt a little strange about this point. How could Sirius Black stay in Azkaban for 12 years without being tortured into a lunatic? Perhaps it can be said that Sirius Black knows that he is innocent, so he has a firm will to resist the Dementors tormenting him. But how did he escape? It is said that it was Sirius Black who starved himself into animagus and escaped through the fence. For this, Eisen thinks it is a bit of a coincidence. The hungry and thin Sirius Black turned into a black dog and could pass through the fence. If the gaps in those fences were smaller, wouldn't his plan be completely ruined? Of course, no matter what, Eisen believed that Sirius Black's 12 years in prison must have been very painful. Don't worry, Hagrid. Hogwarts is guarded by Dementors. Sirius Black can't come in. After pondering for a moment, Eisen comforted him like this. But when he thought of being slapped in the face in the future, he couldn't help but Boo went on to say, besides, there is Dumbledore in the school. He won't watch Harry being hurt. You're right, with Dumbledore around, Hogwarts must be the safest place. Hagrid's tone was much lighter. It seems that Dumbledore's prestige in the wizarding world is indeed very high. Then, in the next few days, Eisen learned from the little wizard at the school that Lupin's defense against the dark arts class became a class that most people liked. After resisting the Boggart, Professor Lupin also took a group of students to study how to deal with the Red Hat, Kabah, and other little guys in an interesting class. It has to be said that compared with the previous Professor Lockhart, Lupin's teaching level is much higher. Although Malfoy of Slytherin had been leading the charge in speaking ill of Lupin, most people hadn't paid much attention to him. However, when it came to Professor Lupin, Eisen suddenly remembered a problem. That is Lupin as a werewolf. What are the conditions for transforming into a werewolf? Does he transform when he sees the full moon on a full moon night? Or does he only transform when the moon is full? If only seeing the full moon transforms, then Dumbledore can cast a spell to cover the moon with clouds every time the full moon is full, and the problem will be solved. There is no need to deliberately arrange Lupin to transform into the Screaming Shack. This also means that Lupin, as a werewolf, will involuntarily transform as long as it is a time like the night of the full moon. But if it will transform as soon as the time comes, how is the time determined? Because throughout the year, the time when the night starts is not fixed. Not to mention, the start time of the full moon night. After much deliberation, Eisen finally could only attribute these strange places to magical magic. At 8:30 on a Saturday night in the room of requirement, the trio began to receive Eisen's teachings. How is it? Can you adapt to the new semester's courses? Seeing the trio's interested expressions, Eisen said directly, forget it. Professor Lupin's defense against the dark arts class was fun, but Trelawney's divination class was terrible. The trio struggled, and Ron replied muffled. Yeah, Professor, you don't know. The atmosphere in the divination class is too depressing. Every class has to predict some ominous things. It's almost suffocating. Harry couldn't help complaining. That's right. Compared with the arithmetic and divination class, the divination class is really disappointing. Hermione, a top student, obviously couldn't grasp the profound aspects of the divination class. But obviously, if you want to get a high score, you have to make your predictions a little bit worse. Eisen winked at several people and showed a meaningful smile. After hearing Eisen's words, the three of them were obviously taken aback and then showed depression. Obviously, this way of teaching is not their specialty. Professor Eisen, will Sirius Black break into Hogwarts to find me? After a while, Harry seemed to have thought of something and asked Eisen directly. Oh, you know that Sirius Black escaped from prison just to find you? Eisen raised his eyebrows and looked at Harry in surprise. Although Eisen was surprised, there was no disturbance in his heart. Eisen had overheard their conversation that day when he was sitting on the last carriage of the Hogwarts Express. Harry had already told Hermione and Ron about Sirius Black's escape from prison. Yes, I overheard it from Ron's parents before school started. I also told Hermione and Ron on the train. Harry said so, not surprising Eisen. Don't worry, there is a Dementor guard entrance. Sirius Black is not so easy to break in, Eisen said, feeling a little strange. Had these words been said somewhere before, thoughts roiling in his mind, but he didn't stop. Besides, with Dumbledore at Hogwarts, no one can hurt you. Harry and Ron looked at each other, seemed relieved at last, and then let out a long breath. Okay, since you're worried about being attacked, do you remember the spell I gave you? Eisen clapped his hands and changed the topic to teaching. Yes, Professor. We are all able to use the disarming charm proficiently, Ron said loudly impatiently. So, what about the defensive spell, the Iron Armor Curse? Eisen remembered that he had taught the three of them the last semester. After such a long time, I don't know how their level is. Professor, I have fully mastered this spell, Hermione said first, and seeing Eisen look over with a smile on his face, he stretched out his wand and waved, Armor Protection. Following Hermione's movements, a transparent shield appeared in front of her out of thin air. It seems that Hermione, the top student, has been practicing this spell during the holidays. A very good iron armor charm. I think you must have practiced it many times during the holidays. Eisen couldn't help clapping as he said. Seeing Eisen's actions, Hermione's pretty face flushed slightly, and she couldn't hide the joy on her face. Harry and Ron on the side also looked at Hermione enviously. What about you? After complimenting Hermione, Eisen looked at Harry and Ron who were motionless and asked again. Professor, I'm sorry, I haven't learned yet. Harry lowered his head in shame. Ever since he ran away from the Dursleys' house and lived in the Leaky Cauldron, he had wandered around Diagon Alley every day and had long forgotten to practice the spell. Looking at Ron with the same expression on the side, Eisen still doesn't understand their situation. Okay, let's continue today's practice. Eisen sighed and then continued, you two go to practice the Iron Armor Curse. Remember to practice one-on-one. Harry casts the Disarming Curse. Ron casts it Iron Curse. Remember, after casting the spell once, in turn, Ron casts the Disarming Charm, and Harry casts the Iron Armor Charm. Practice alternately like this all the time. Let's start. After explaining, Eisen waved his wand, and a stone platform rose from Harry and Ron's feet, then moved to the side of the room and became a ring and fixed it. Disarm you. Armor protection. Harry and Ron started fighting. Perhaps because of the new wand bought in the new semester, Ron's self-confidence has increased a lot. Chapter 9. Eisen vs. Hermione, Part 2. Professor, what about me? Seeing that Harry and Ron had already started combat practice, Hermione looked at Eisen with burning eyes. Huh, what do you think? How about I come to fight with you? Eisen looked at Hermione with interest. Really? Hermione's face brightened, but then she seemed to think of something. Her little face collapsed again. But, Professor Eisen, you are so powerful. I am definitely not your opponent. Don't worry. I just teach you how to fight with the Disarming Curse and the Armor Curse, and I will control the power. Eisen said comfortingly. Immediately afterwards, Eisen had a thought, and a stone platform was raised under his feet to support the two of them, and moved to the other side of the battle area between Harry and Ron. Standing on the ring, with a distance of 5 meters between the two, Eisen casually looked at Hermione with a wand in his hand. You can start anytime. Don't worry about hurting me. Professor Eisen, be careful. Hermione took a deep breath. It was the first time she played against her favorite professor. She seemed a little nervous. Expelliarmus. Hermione's voice broke out in a hurry, and the wand was thrust in Eisen's direction, and a red light burst out. Eisen showed appreciation, but he didn't cast the Iron Armor Curse to deal with it. Instead, he moved his body to avoid the spell's attack with a swipe of his footsteps before the spell's attack approached him. Remember, Hermione, all attack spells have no automatic aiming effect, so this means that dodge can actually avoid the magic attack. Eisen did not forget to teach the other party while dodging. Expelliarmus. Eisen flew at Hermione with a disarming spell at lightning speed. Helm! Before Hermione could react, the red light had hit the wand in her hand, knocking her wand flying. How is it? Seeing that Hermione did not show any disappointment after picking up her wand, Eisen stepped forward and asked, How do you feel? Professor Eisen, I found that your reaction speed is much faster. Hermione recalled the battle that lasted just a few seconds, nodded, and said the key point. That's right. Many people think that the magic power in a young wizard's body is not as good as that of an adult wizard, so his actual combat ability is not as good as that of an adult wizard. However, through the battle just now, I think you have realized the importance of reaction speed. Eisen showed satisfaction. If the reaction speed is one step faster, then it is not impossible for the young wizard to defeat the adult wizard. Again, Professor? Hermione blinked, all the more interested. Eisen backed away with a smile, standing still and waiting for Hermione's spell. Disarm. Hermione cast another disarming spell. This time, Eisen didn't dodge and directly took a disarming spell from Hermione. A force hit. Eisen relaxed his body and did not resist the force. Then, his feet left the ground and flew backwards. Watching the professor get hit, Hermione had a look of surprise on her face. But Eisen didn't give her time to be surprised. The moment she was knocked into the air, Eisen waved his wand in his hand. Expelliarmus. Before Eisen's body fell to the ground, a red light crossed the distance between the two of them and hit the wand in Hermione's hand with precision. Immediately, Hermione's wand was knocked away again. Afterwards, Eisen twisted his body in the air, relied on his strong physical fitness, and after somersaulting, he successfully stopped with both feet. Seeing Hermione's surprised face, Eisen smiled slightly. How is it? What do you think this time? Professor Eisen, what do you mean? Hermione looked thoughtful after picking up her wand. It means that if you are really fighting the enemy, even if the attack spell hits the opponent, don't think that the opponent has no power to fight back. Eisen nodded. At this time, you have two options to do things, or continue attack the opponent, or add protection to yourself. I suggest you cast the Iron Armor Curse to protect yourself. I see. Hermione had a smile on her face. Come on, go on. Eisen raised his hand and pointed at Hermione with his wand, and after gesturing to her, he issued a disarming spell directly. Armor protection. Eisen wasn't using his full strength, so Hermione's armor charm successfully blocked Eisen's disarming charm and bounced it to the other side. Fine, it was the right response, but I guess sometimes you need to be more aware of the fight. Do it again. At Eisen's signal, Hermione cast the Iron Armor Charm, and then he cast a disarming charm and fired it. The change visible to the naked eye is that this disarming curse is much brighter and faster than the previous one. To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, changed sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa Udo Android and Apple are all available. Obviously, this time Eisen had mobilized some more magic power in his body, and the power of the disarming spell he cast was no longer the same. Laugh. Almost at the same time that Hermione successfully cast the Iron Armor charm, Eisen's disarming charm struck, followed by a soft crack. Eisen's disarming charm had pierced the Iron Armor curse in front of Hermione, hitting her body and sending her flying. Shock reduction and speed stop. Seeing Hermione retreating quickly, Eisen cast another spell immediately, slowed Hermione down before she fell to the ground. After getting up, Hermione quickly patted the upper and lower sides of her body, and was relieved when she found that there was no injury. How does it feel? Eisen stepped forward and asked. Hearing Eisen's question, Hermione frowned slightly, remembering Eisen's powerful disarming spell just now. Professor Eisen, the disarming spell you cast has become much more powerful, so the Iron Armor curse is useless? Hermione looked at Eisen thoughtfully. That's right. I think you have to know one thing. When you are fighting against an enemy, you must ensure that you have a strong will to defeat the enemy, or even kill the enemy. Eisen pondered for a moment and said this out. Is that so? Hermione couldn't help opening her mouth when she heard such cruel words. Eisen nodded solemnly and continued. The magical power in a young wizard's body is not enough to compare with that of an adult wizard. So if you want to fight against an adult wizard, in addition to your on-the-spot reaction, your strong desire to win can make your spells more powerful. Increase. I mean, when you know for sure that the enemy in front of you is going to kill you, your willingness to overcome the enemy and even kill the enemy can help a lot if you don't want to die. Hermione's hand holding the wand tightened tightly, as if struggling. Then, under Eisen's gaze, Hermione pursed her lips. Professor Eisen, I see. Eisen smiled in satisfaction and continued to fight Hermione. Well, in fact, Eisen has been releasing water. After all, his purpose was to train Hermione's actual combat ability, not to hurt Hermione's self-confidence. Therefore, Eisen controlled his strength and fought with Hermione in a back-and-forth way. During this period, Eisen opened the god's perspective throughout the whole process. After each round of battle, Eisen would point out where Hermione needs to improve and so on. From time to time, Eisen also watched the fight between Harry and Ron's team. It can be seen that Harry and Ron are also making rapid progress. Half an hour later, before the end of this actual combat training, Eisen found that Hermione's actual combat ability has made great progress. There is already a certain fighting rhythm between offense and defense, and even the footsteps are moving in a decent way. And Harry and Ron successfully learned the Iron Armor curse. After today's class, Eisen restored the room to its original state. How is it? How do you feel about today's actual combat training? Seeing that the three were still in high spirits, Eisen asked. It feels great. I already know what actual combat is. Hermione put away her wand with a smile on her face. Yes, this actual battle is great. We have already learned the Iron Armor curse. This is something useful. Harry stretched out his arms to wrap his arms around Ron next to him, with indescribable excitement revealed in his tone. Eisen looked at the three of them with great interest and revealed his thoughts. Well, let me tell you in advance, I usually practice the spells I learned more often. In the next actual combat training, I think I can take it once. The three of you take turns fighting against each other to train. Can use spells at will. In addition to the disarming curse and Iron Armor curse, the stunning curse, petrification curse, or other small jinxes are fine, as long as you defeat the opponent. That's really cool. Ron had a smirk on his face, as if he was thinking about what jinx he was going to use. Understood, Professor Eisen. Hermione nodded vigorously, looking at Eisen with burning eyes. This kind of gaze made Eisen feel quite useful, the corners of his mouth slightly raised, and he greeted the three of them. Let's go. It's getting late. Hurry back. Chapter 10 Dress Up. In the following week, Hogwarts did not have much disturbance, but the depressive and desperate atmosphere emanating from the Dementors spread throughout Hogwarts, making everyone unhappy. Fortunately, there are calming crystal balls in the classroom and dormitory, so the little wizards are not affected too much in class. So the professors are in a pretty good mood. However, if there is one professor who is in the worst mood, it is undoubtedly Hagrid, the protection of magical creatures professor who had an accident in the first class. The reason? Naturally, it was because of an accident in the first class of the protection of magical creatures class. After that, the class became dull. Therefore, no one liked such courses very much. Hagrid, who thought he had made a serious mistake, also seemed to have completely lost confidence in the protection of magical creatures class, and did not dare to make some large magical creatures to make the little wizards toss in class. Of course, Hagrid still pissed everyone off when he left the flobberworm in the care of the wizards. Even Ron found it incomprehensible to take care of them. Another actual combat training, Eisen let Hermione, Harry, and Ron take turns to fight according to the previous plan. After a class, you can clearly see the progress of the three of them. To Eisen's surprise, Hermione's progress seemed to be a little more obvious. Perhaps it was because he practiced her himself in the last class. Before the end of the practical class, Hermione also practiced hand-to-hand combat with Harry and Ron. Although the result of the battle was that Hermione was defeated by a narrow margin, Eisen could see that it might be because Hermione's spirit had deteriorated a lot. This performance reminded Eisen that Hermione had to take a few more classes and do a lot more homework than Harry and Ron every day. To be honest, I have been using Yegwa to read and read books recently, changed sources, and read aloud with many timbers. Yegwa Udo Android and Apple are all available. Hermione, I can imagine how busy you are every day, so I suggest that you give up 1 or 2 elective courses. This was Eisen's suggestion to Hermione at that time. After all, Eisen was still very concerned about Hermione's condition. However, although Hermione was very happy about Eisen's suggestion, she was still very confident. So I gave Eisen a sentence, I don't want to give up, I believe I have no problem. Seeing this, Eisen could only give up. If nothing unexpected happened, Hermione would end up dropping 2 classes in the next school year. Early on Sunday morning, after having dinner and asking for some unicorn hair from Hagrid, Eisen left Hogwarts and came to his secret base. As usual, after observing in the cubicle for a while, and finding that the crystal ball was functioning as usual, Eisen came to the laboratory. Taking out the unicorn hair he asked for from Hagrid, Eisen began to weave with the magic power flowing in his body. Maybe Eisen doesn't have such skills at all, but fortunately, the power of magic is amazing enough. When Eisen shows such willingness, magic will help him accomplish all this. Half an hour later, when Eisen stopped, a silver-white bracelet took shape. Looking at the shaped bracelet, the corners of Eisen's mouth curled up slightly, and then he put it away. After doing this, Eisen turned his attention to the purple wizard robes on the table. After further digging into quest for ancient alchemy and experience of alchemy during this period, Eisen has a full grasp of making anti-spell clothing. Fred and George, they developed and manufactured a 3-piece anti-curse hat set, and if they want to deflect the curse, they need to stare into each other's eyes. Of course, the anti-spell clothing that Eisen wants to make cannot completely copy the ideas of the two. After all, looking into an enemy's eyes is a little unreliable. If the enemy wears sunglasses or closes his eyes, wouldn't the magic-proof clothing made by Eisen have no effect? Therefore, Eisen intends to directly transplant the effect of the iron armor curse to the purple wizard robe in front of him. Of course, after such a long time of research, Eisen felt that it was necessary for him to directly integrate the armor body, super armor body, and ultimate armor body into the wizard robe. In this way, he doesn't know whether the curse-proof clothing made by Eisen can resist the Avada Kedavra, but at the very least, it should be able to rebound more spells and curses. Armor protection, spreading the wizard's robes on the table, Eisen concentrated on casting an iron armor spell with his wand in his hand. With all his strength, a bright golden light suddenly appeared, and a bright golden shield with distinct texture appeared in front of Eisen's eyes. Afterwards, Eisen's wand pointed at the shield, and the shield spread over the wizard's robes as he turned his mind. Immediately afterwards, lines flashed in the shield, and lines of rune changed, flowing from it, and then penetrated into the wizard's robe below. As time passed, the color of the golden shield gradually became lighter. On the other hand, the purple wizard's robe below, with faint golden textures flickering on it, looks extraordinarily gorgeous. When the golden shield turned transparent and disappeared completely, the entire wizard robe had a golden luster. The golden luster circulated endlessly on it, even overpowering the purple of the robe itself. Looking at the scene in front of him, Eisen finally let out a long breath. However, the matter was not over yet, so Eisen paused for a while to feel it, and then started to move again. As before, Eisen cast super armor and ultimate armor. Fortunately, Eisen is perfect at controlling the magic. Therefore, there were no accidents in the whole production process. When Eisen stopped all movements, the purple wizard robe spread on the long table had completely changed in color. On the surface of the entire robe, the original purple was almost invisible. The bright golden luster circulated on the robe, twisted from time to time, and arranged in a strange way, creating an extraordinarily noble and mysterious temperament. Looking at the curse-proof clothing that was successfully produced in front of him, Eisen frowned tightly. As for the golden wizard robes, after being worn out in the wizarding world, they are indeed more conspicuous. However, the anti-spell clothing in front of Eisen's eyes is not as simple as gold, but a kind of luminous gold. This is a bit too flamboyant. If Eisen wears it back to Hogwarts, it will probably spread throughout the school in less than half an hour. Perhaps, in a few days, Eisen will have a nickname at Hogwarts, the Shining Eisen. With that in mind, Eisen held his wand against the wizard's robes. Hide and hide. Invisible and invisible. By the time Eisen withdrew his wand, the wizard's robes, which had been gleaming before, had returned to their original appearance, and the color of the exterior had turned purple again. Although the purple robe still looked a little more gorgeous, but fortunately it was not so noticeable. Of course, wearing such a wizard robe might make some young wizards feel strange at first, but after a long time, there shouldn't be any troubles. A thought flashed through his mind, but Eisen didn't stop what he was doing. After taking off the black robe on his body and putting it away, Eisen directly put on the spell-proof clothing made of the purple wizard's robe. I don't know if it was an illusion, but after putting on the anti-spell suit, Eisen suddenly felt that his sense of security had increased a lot. After returning to Hogwarts with phantom invisibility again, after Eisen walked out of the office, it was no surprise that he attracted the attention of many people. After all, in many people's minds, this low-profile astronomy professor has always been wearing black wizard robes. Suddenly changing into a purple robe is indeed a bit surprising. But fortunately, he was only slightly surprised, and nothing strange happened. Even in the evening, when the trio saw the purple robe on Eisen's body, they were just surprised and then ignored it. That night, Eisen was sitting in the office, holding a silver bracelet in his hand, rubbing and meditating. To create this bracelet, Eisen added the magic of calming the mind and enhancing vitality. The purpose, of course, is to take the time to give it to Hermione, to relieve her a little pressure on study.